Good afternoon. This meeting of the Task Force for Renewing the Connectivity and Technology Needs of Precision Agriculture in the United States is called to order. Welcome to our task force members joining virtually, and welcome to everyone who's watching live at fcc.gov/live. My name is Elizabeth Kuttner, and I'm the designated federal officer for the task force. I'm joined today by Stacey Ferraro and Lauren Gary, our deputy DFOs. We'll proceed to the roll call. Teddy Bekele, Chair, Land O'Lakes.
Present.
Dr. Michael Adeline, Vice Chair, South Dakota State University.
Present.
The Honorable Dale Artho, Deaf Smith County, Texas.
Present.
The Honorable Loran Osley, Florida State Senate District 3. Dr. Srikala Bajwa, Montana State University College of Agriculture and Montana Agricultural Experiment Station.
Present.
Andy Bader, Fifth Estate Growers, LLC. Julie Bichelle, Irrigation Association.
Present.
Michael Gomes, Topcon Agriculture. Heather Hampton Nodal, Nodal Limited Farms. Robert Hance, Midwest Energy and Communications. Brian Krogh, John Deere.
Present.
Jennifer Manor, Hughes Network Systems, LLC.
Here, thank you.
Joy Sterling, Iron Horse Vineyards.
Here.
Jimmy Todd, Nextech.
Present.
From the Department of Agriculture, Chris McLean, Acting Administrator, Rural Utility Service, USDA.
Present.
Great. And I do think there were some folks that joined during roll call. So if there are those that missed their name, if you could just indicate if you're on.
Heather
Mike
Hampton.
Gomes, I'm on.
Thanks.
Hey, Mike and Heather, thanks for joining.
Yeah, this is
All right.
Anthony Dillard also. I'm on.
Oh, great, Anthony, thanks for joining as well. So with that, we do have a quorum and a packed agenda. So I'll hand it back over to the task force chair, Teddy, to start the meeting. Teddy?
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth, and good afternoon and good morning to everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. Great to have everybody back together for our July meeting. I know there's been a lot of discussions and a lot of interactions in the working groups, but really excited to get with the main task force today to get a little bit of an update on what's been happening in the working groups, as well as to get some really interesting presentations from a variety of speakers today. Again, I want to remind everyone this is our meeting for the mid-year. We will have yet another meeting towards the latter part of the year, maybe two, depending on if we have to have two voting sessions or we have to have a review of the material that we'll be submitting this year. So again, all of this is to inform us of that. So right now we're still in the learning phase of still getting more information from some subject matter experts. And so that will be the core of our meeting today. So just reviewing the agenda really quick, right after this initial introduction and roll call, we'll turn it over to Rick Monaghan from the DHS and Cybersecurity to give us a little bit of an overview of we've talked about cybersecurity. We've had several conversations, particularly in some of the working groups, but really kind of getting that view from the Department of Homeland Security will be super interesting. So I'm really looking forward to that presentation, as well as the questions and the dialogue we'll have shortly after that. Following that presentation, we'll get into the future of ag production. And so we'll have several folks with us on that presentation. Kurt Blades from the Association of Equipment Manufacturer, Michael Gomes, who is a task force member, but also representing Topcon as a Vice President of Strategic Business Development, and then Benjamin Smith as a Principal Advisor from Kubota Tractor Corporation. So we'll have a little bit of a presentation. There was a white paper that was sent out to everybody as a pre-read, and then we'll also have a little bit of a panel discussion, which I think will be interesting. From there, right around 1:45 p.m. Eastern, we'll take a 15-minute break and regroup at 2 p.m. Eastern. And then from that, we will just have the updates from all the working groups. And I believe there's material that's been submitted from most, if not all, the working groups. So we'll go through that. That'll be a great time not only to hear from about what the working groups have been doing, but also an opportunity to ask questions, identify areas of overlap, identify potential areas of where we could collaborate a bit more, and really start to drive towards the recommendation we'll put together in the latter part of the year. And then we'll conclude the meeting with just some open discussion time and any other topics that any task force member wants to bring up and have a discussion at that point. So that will be sort of how we roll with the day. So with that, I won't take up too much time because I don't want to steal minutes away. So I'll turn it over to Rick from DHS to give us an overview on cybersecurity. Rick, I believe you're on.
Yep. Okay.
Perfect.
And I'm just waiting for the slides to pop up.
Still not seeing the slides. Oh, something is happening now.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Hi, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Rick Monaghan, and I'm an analyst with the National Risk Management Center, which is a component of CISA, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, which is the nation's risk advisor. CISA works with the private, corporate, and government partners to defend against today's threats and collaborate to build a more secure and resilient infrastructure for the future. I personally have spent 5 years conducting risk analysis with emphasis on unmanned aerial systems, or UASs, within the energy sector, specifically looking at the electric grid and ONG pipelines and the OT operational technology networks and the F&A sector, food and ag sector. And I'm currently a member of the Accelerating Broadband Deployment on Unserved Agricultural Land Working Group. This is, I would say, fairly generalized information, and I put this together as information that could help anyone, whether you're a government employee, a corporate employee, a small business owner, or a small farmer. Next slide, please. So the agenda for today, again, I want to do a quick high-level discussion of the risk and the threat and how that links through with 5G and PNT, also precision agriculture, and then discuss mitigation and what CISA can support, what CISA support can be provided to the F&A sector. And finally, just so we're all on the same sheet of music, I pulled the USDA precision agriculture definition. Next slide, please. So the threat to the food and ag sector is growing as first, the sector becomes more connected, and second, the greater the observed impact of a successful attack within the sector emboldens others, which is a similar pattern as we've seen in past attacks against the financial sectors and the health sectors. As the use of digital tools and software and the internet increase across the sector, so does our risk increase. The same threats facing other connected industries are impacting food and ag, whether that's financial losses due to someone draining an account or ransomware, loss of non-public information, which could impact market prices and even government policy, the theft of intellectual capital, and there's also just that plain potential for loss and damage of product, equipment, and damage to your reputation. Slide, please. So these are our leading nation state actors. We're all very familiar with Russia and their multiple attacks on the Ukrainian electric grid over the last few years. Also, there have been multiple ransomware attacks by government agencies that have got out of control and actually impacted the world economy for billions of dollars over the last couple of years. Plus, Russia has a very mature and very well established Information and Disinformation Office and multiple outstanding campaigns to get that information into the public sector. Also, ransomware is an industry, and cyber gangs notably support the Russian government. For example, the Russian ransomware gang Black Matter has threatened and attacked multiple food and ag sector entities. The Chinese are very important in this same field. They have passed cybersecurity and intelligence laws that dictate Chinese companies and Chinese controlled technology groups are required to support Chinese intelligence agencies in the interests of Chinese national security. So some of those Chinese made UASs that we're flying, they're storing data on Chinese company servers, which may be available to security and intelligence services. So why is that important? You know, if you're gathering data on your farm and you're next to, say, a dam or a nuclear energy plant or a government installation, and that intelligence service accesses that data, they may gain some critical information on the vulnerability of those facilities, and which obviously could be used against our nation. Also, various organizations within China have conducted intellectual property theft, whether it's military related, commercial, industrial, proprietary information, and taking information from educational institutions. Between 2013 and 2017, we know Iranian hackers hacked into more than 170 universities, stole over $3.4 billion worth of intellectual property, which they often took and sold that data to Iranian customers. And obviously, the U.S. entities that developed that property have not been reimbursed for that information. And finally, North Korea, they're a well-known cyber criminal country. Ransomware is a business there, as are their hacking through banks and making illegal transfer of funds, their theft of Bitcoin, and their most famous attack is probably the attack on Sony in 2014. Slide, please. So 5G is here, and the FCC goals is to have 5G coming to your farm. The 5th generation technology, wireless technology, provides downloads at 100 times faster than 4G with a 10-time decrease in latency. 5G allows communities to build smart cities using infrastructure harnessing the growing number of low-cost sensors and technologies and using data to improve the life of residents in those cities. For example, smart cities make it easier for autonomous vehicles and people to navigate through the city. They're able to monitor traffic flow and reduce congestion. Cities are able to track, monitor, and control energy usage. And there's the obvious use of information by and for public safety. 5G can do the same in agriculture. We can communicate with our field sensors and equipment in real time, identify specific concerns, and immediately treat those before an entire field is infected or is infected. We can monitor the conditions that animals are living in, from temperature, humidity, food status, and how much each of those animals is consuming. But with great opportunity comes increased risk, and the more the connections we have to the internet, the greater the attack surface exists. Slide, please. So threats often begin in the concept development. Something's overlooked, a security concept is downgraded, but when that security control becomes the vulnerability, it can be exploited until we discover that vulnerability and a patch is developed by the manufacturer. As we all know, supply chains are strained and not as efficient as pre-COVID. But besides the issue of actually getting products through the supply chain, the other question is, are vendors and manufacturers being held accountable? Are they providing certifications on their security and the authenticity of the components and the software that they're selling to you? And probably the biggest point is, are you asking those questions? That's very important. If you have to start asking questions about the security and the authenticity of what you're buying. And if criminals in nation states can create vulnerabilities during that software development and manufacturing stages, they've made it easier for them to conduct future attacks on your network. Slide, please. So compromised software and equipment can directly impact precision agriculture and your business. If you lose your personal and your employees' information, your tax returns, productivity, financial records, that can interfere with your relationship with your bank, the IRS, and even your buyers. But equally bad on your connected farms, the loss of information that's collected by your sensors, the loss of communication with your autonomous equipment, which could result in shutting down your operations, especially a devastating event during the planting and harvesting seasons. Slide, please. The F&A sector is increasingly dependent on the location services provided by GPS. Just so you know, the GPS system is a series of 31 satellites that is operated by U.S. Space Command. It provides 24-hour coverage in all weather conditions. Also, flying in the skies are 3 other major systems. There's Galileo, the European GPS system, and a Chinese and a Russian GPS system. However, within the United States, only the US GPS and Galileo are authorized for use. Slide, please. Autonomous precision ag equipment needs that GPS signal to function and to keep the users informed of where it is, just like trucking companies monitor where their vehicles are as they move about the country. GPS signals are weak. It's like trying to see a 20-watt light bulb in California if you're in New York at noon. Those signals are also unencrypted and they're difficult to authenticate. And while federal law does prohibit the operation and sales of jamming equipment, you can find that equipment available on the internet for around $50. You can also buy GPS spoofing equipment for around $250 on the internet. And spoofing is when someone uses a radio transmitter to send a stronger counterfeit GPS signal to your receiver antenna. And most of those receiver antennas are designed to use the strongest signal that it receives, so that fake signal overrides the weaker but legitimate satellite signal, which tells your receiver it's in a different location than it really is. So GPS is a critical part of precision agriculture. And again, asking questions about autonomous equipment and GPS security is a very good recommendation. Slide, please. So with the efforts to expand broadband across agricultural land and the growth of PA, we're more reliant on precision agriculture technology. Without that combined GPS location and broadband, we lose the advantages precision ag provides. You know, where's our combine? Where are our cattle? Our UASs can identify outbreaks, but where in the field are those outbreaks occurring? And as we learn to spot pests and apply fertilizer only where a crop is not performing well, we're also minimizing use of chemicals, reducing petroleum consumption, we're lowering our operating costs, and we're helping the environment and Mother Earth. Slide, please. Next slide. So we're creating smart cities. Well, let's create smart farms. Again, smart cities are communities building infrastructure to continuously use data to improve life of residents. Those sensors, the internet, artificial intelligence, decision support software, ground and aerial drones, autonomous vehicles are all available to the precision agricultural market to build smart farms. So whether it's a couple of acres, a greenhouse, or a ranch, connecting with your crops, your animals, and with your customers to let them know what you have available is a win-win situation. And as we're aware, the FCC Accelerating Deployment Working Group is developing recommendations to expand deployment of broadband service on 95% of unused ag land by 2025. Slide, please. So I believe the biggest risk in farming is Mother Nature, followed by the bank. However, if we don't manage our network and security, then those nefarious actors mentioned earlier could access your network and use your network for theft, to waste your resources, or potentially harming your equipment, livestock, or crops. Farming requires the knowledge of your land, your animals, weather, and the markets. And precision ag technology adds even more information to inform your decision making. A smart, secure farm allows both better management of assets and can improve your productivity. And just like you protect your livestock, your network requires protection. Security can't be avoided and it can't be hands off. It needs to be a trusted partnership between the agriculture community, manufacturers, and the technology providers. Is the equipment you're spending your resources on secure? Are those components genuine or are they counterfeit? Does the software conceal malware? Again, who has looked, who's checked, who's tested? Questions you need to ask. So protect your farm, protect yourself, protect your business. And again, another recommendation is hiring consultants or finding a mentor and coach to help guide you through the security of your network. Slide, please. So how can you protect your farm, your business, yourself? Steps you should consider. There we go. Okay, slide, please. There we go. Okay, so how can you protect your farm? Step you should consider first, I think foremost, is backing up your data, your network continuously, and ransomware definitely requires that you do that. Multi-factor authentication is very important nowadays, and it's most systems now you can just click on and turn it on internally. You don't need to do a lot of extra work. Patch management, keeping your software up to date, inventorying and removing unnecessary hardware and software. If you remember the Oldsmar, Florida water treatment plant attack last year, software was still on their network that was no longer used, and that's how the intruder got on and changed their plant settings. Removing employee access, especially when they depart. I don't know how many times I've heard of people that have left companies and either when they have been rehired by that company or going in and conducting red team exercises, complete the exercise within minutes because their username and password, their credentials were never deleted from the system. And finally, I strongly recommend segmenting your network. If you have a flat network with no protection built into it, an intruder can move through your whole network with absolutely no problem. But if you segment your network jewels, protect them behind demilitarized zones and firewalls, you'll be better off, and it will either slow down or halt those nefarious actors from moving through your network. Slide, please. So what can CISA provide to the agriculture community? We've recently posted a website called Shields Up, recommendations for organizations regardless of size. Again, whether it's a large corporation, a small business, a farmer, adopt heightened cybersecurity postures when it comes to protecting those critical assets. Some recommendations on that website include how to reduce the likelihood of a cyber intrusion, steps to quickly detect intrusions, how to be prepared, and maximizing your organization's resilience. If you're attacked, contact your law enforcement, and if you have cyber insurance, your insurance company. Also, feel free to report that to the FBI and CISA. And FBI and CISA communicate that information immediately back and forth, so we both know what's going on when it comes to cyber attacks. Additionally, the FBI and CISA may have resources to help you mitigate that attack. Also, CISA has prepared a services catalog of products that are free to everybody. And these are government and private industry products that are available to help you. Again, they're free. Some of these resources you can start almost immediately, such as cyber hygiene vulnerability scanning. Sign up, and within a couple of weeks, you'll start getting reports of scans that CISA will do on your network, and you'll get a report of vulnerabilities that they have found. There are lots of other resources in that catalog, including graphics, training, and exercises. And finally, stopransomware.gov is the government's one-stop location for resources to tackle ransomware more effectively. Slide. So in conclusion, I'd like to just say that it's probably not a case of if you're going to get attacked, it's a case of when you'll be attacked. But I would say treat your network like a piece of equipment, like your livestock. Take care of it. Plan for the worst, but plan on how you're going to get up and operating again. Again, that goes back to making backup copies of your system. Patch, and then patch again your network. Use MFA and use segmentation. And practice responding to a breach. Who's on your team to help you out? Law enforcement, insurance, private consultants. And how do you rebuild your network? Where's that backup copy, and will it actually work when you need it to rebuild your network? And finally, you're your best security manager. You need to ask the questions and you need to get answers. You need to identify your weaknesses, and you need to work on fixing them, or at least knowing how you're going to mitigate them. And that concludes my briefing. What are your questions at this time? Next slide, please.
Great. Thank you, Rick. Again, for the task force members, if you have a question, just raise the hand in Teams and I will call on you and we can go from there. Heather has a question. Go ahead, Heather.
Just because that's what I do. So with our working group on the connectivity and needs and demand piece, what recommendations might you have? I hear those terms like the spoofers and jammers being available on the internet for relatively low cost of entry. You know, what specifically would you recommend we might look at if we need to look at anything in this topic area?
Well, again, I will tell you, I'm not an expert. I borrowed the slides from our PNT team, and they are experts at it. So first of all, I can, if you'd like, I can put you in contact with one of the members of that team. But second, again, I think the biggest thing that I've found in my research is asking questions. And, you know, I personally never thought of in the past of, you know, when you're buying a GPS, you know, years ago when you actually bought a GPS, and even with my phone now, asking the question of how secure is that? Can it be spoofed? Can it be jammed? Well, it can be jammed. Can it be spoofed? Again, I don't know. So that's the number one recommendation I have, is ask questions. And I would say in this environment where we're talking precision agriculture, if you're out talking to that, you know, farm equipment manufacturer it's ready to sell you autonomous type equipment, ask the question of them of how is that receiver protected, and how will it keep you, the user, safe.
Thank you. We have one of those members in our working group and on this call, so I'm sure he just noted that. Thank
Right.
you.
Michael Adeline.
Thanks, Teddy. My question is this, certainly at the university, and I've had the opportunity to be up close and personal with nation states and what they would like to see from South Dakota State. But we are connected here to the FBI. We are connected to other universities that do research, and we are the Security Operations Center. So we have intensive resources, but the average farmer is not. How do we create communities of interest in order to have people that they trust and say, you know what, you might not want to buy that Huawei, camera. How do we get that information? How do we create these interest communities to give them real-time actionable steps that they understand that they can do as we move forward with this precision ag adventure?
I know, I think the number one thing is not only putting information out there, but reposting it periodically. And I notice how, if you flip through Google, the, you go to Google and you flip through their news, you keep seeing things popping up over and over. And I know that in CISA, we do that also. Every once in a while, you'll see an old product pop back up again. And sometimes I think it is just for that reason of let's get this back out in front of people. Um, I think it has to be a combination of, like I said, the agriculture community, the vendors. The vendors are really important to this thing. A lot of times, you buy that car and you drive it off the lot, and after that, oh, sorry, that's your car. That's, they're not there to help. But I think we need to get the vendors very involved in this also. And they're the ones that also need to go back to the manufacturers and say, is this equipment safe? Is this software secure? Um, but I think, besides just constant, I think we just need to constantly keep putting that message back out there. Uh, uh, does that help out, Mike? It's kind of
Yep.
not the best answer, but it's the one I can tap dance the quickest to.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Jimmy Todd?
So I just was going to chime in on Heather's question. One of the challenges with GPS and devices is that it auto authenticates that. So when you're talking about trying to avoid a spoofed GPS, you don't even have access to that capability. So, I agree that vendors are going to be important in some of these efforts. We do, part of our organization does IT MSP services. So everything that Rick has talked about with regards to the CISA guidelines and the things that are important to protect your network and your data are absolutely true. We provide these services for small and mid-sized businesses across Kansas and the Midwest area. The challenge, talking to Dr. Adelaide's question is, it's a constant effort in education, and I do think that's where we have to continue to educate through all of our groups, whether it's an ag group or it's a local community group, about the issues associated with cyber incidents. So just, we've seen that for years, and following those CISA guidelines is a huge help to protecting data and networks.
Thank you, Jimmy. Julie has a question.
Yes, thank you, Teddy. Rick, our group, Adoption and Jobs, is really starting to talk about the education piece of this. And from your presentation, a lot of talk about 5G. Would you say these recommendations would equally extend to fixed wireless networks or private mobility networks deployed on farm?
I think these recommendations apply across the board. Again, no matter what you're doing, you need to protect your network. You need to have a secure network. And if it doesn't matter to, in my mind, it doesn't matter. It extends across everything. If you don't protect it, someone else will get it and make use of it.
Sure. So I guess my fear would be if we tie standards and questions, et cetera, solely to 5G, farmers might say, well, I don't have 5G. You know, I have X, Y, and Z. So is it important for us as a task force to consider calling out, you know, different types of networks that they may be operating on?
Right. And yes, I obviously focused on 5G because that is where precision ag, the future of precision ag lies, having that smart farm. But it applies, it's no different than 4G or 3G. I mean, cyber criminals were doing business on 3G networks just like they are on 4G and now 5G networks.
Thank you.
Michael Gomes has a question.
Yeah, it's probably less of a question, more of a comment, in just the fact that everybody likes to think specifically about the vulnerability of farms, when maybe some of the vulnerabilities might be at some of the organizations that are kind of in the intermediaries, like cooperatives, right? Because they're doing high value transactions. And in many cases, their infrastructure is there, and the thresholds around their infrastructure are relatively low. And so, I worry less about individual farms and more about elements of how it works through the organization, right? And how that could work when I begin to think through where some of those possibilities, some of those threats are. And so I think it's increasing in awareness. So thanks very much. Love your presentation, but we've got a long road to hoe to help our industry understand how threatening some of these situations can be. I guess that's just my comment.
Well, I'd like to build on that. And, if you think about the water industry, Oldsmar, they don't have a lot of money to have that cyber security person. Their cyber security person is probably, he knows how to give you a password, a username and password, and that's the problem with any small business. And I kept mentioning the farm because typically a farm is just a very few people, and depending on the age of the folks, the older they are, probably the less cyber aware they are. So if they're making a step into precision agriculture, they may not understand, they may not be able to ask the right questions, they may not know to ask those right questions. So that's kind of why I was looking at the farm. But I did mention at the opening whether you're corporate or small business. But your point about like the cooperatives, I guess I would probably guess some of those are very similar to the water industry, where they don't have the resources. You have just enough people to do the buying and selling, but you don't necessarily have that overhead to have that cybersecurity person. And I think you're absolutely right. We need to just keep working on awareness. Maybe folks need to figure out how to take 2 or 3 cooperatives and hire one cyber expert to help all 3 of them, and they just each pay a portion of his salary. I don't know. There's lots of options, I guess. And again, you can reach out. Like I said, CISA has a lot of things in that catalog that can help you out. At least they could guide you. If you do a scan of your system and you find out that port 17 is open, then all you have to do is learn how to close port 17, and that eliminates one possible avenue of attack.
Thank you.
But thank you. I appreciate your comment. Thank you.
Thank you for that comment. Chris McLean has a question or hand up.
Yes, thank you very much. And I want to thank Michael for that comment about the co-ops, just to let the task force know. We are trying ourselves to raise awareness. We're including almost in every single award letter that we've made since the summer, just a notice that you should have a cybersecurity plan and and a supply chain plan and a plan to comply with CISA and Department of Homeland Security guidance. And we also have loan dollars available at RUS for rural electric cooperatives to finance cybersecurity, grid security, and fire prevention needs. And our neighbors across the street here, over my shoulder at the Department of Energy, have programs to grant dollars, I think, available for cybersecurity. And I believe they're working with NRECA, National Rural Electric Cooperative Association. Your point also, Richard, about water systems, something that we worry very much about, and again, are trying to raise awareness as well. You described the water systems extremely well. They're sometimes are run by one or two people. We have a system at USDA called the Circuit Riders, where we provide technical assistance, and we're going to be trying to increase the profile of cyber threats to water systems, because that's life and death if somebody messes with a water system, and it can really hurt people if they have hostile intentions. So you put your finger on what keeps us up at night, and we welcome any partnership with DHS, DOE, EPA to be able to spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Bajwa has a question.
Thank you, Teddy, and thank you, Richard, for a informative presentation. My question is, you talked about the end user, what end user should be doing, but the reality is most of the end users don't know enough to ask those questions and follow those protocols. You also talked about the vendors, what they can do. And I am just wondering about what is the government doing? I'm not coming from the cybersecurity side, but I think about the Clean Air Act and how that influenced the manufacturers to go and change, the engine manufacturing, the emission, maintaining a minimum emission standard or something like that. So I'm just wondering, I know I am a university person, but I know many of my researchers, when they order a GPS, they are not looking at the security. They're looking at, resolution or the quality of the data. So are there something that your group or other parts of the federal government doing that would ensure a minimum cybersecurity for the instruments, for the softwares, for the services that the farmers and the researchers may be using? And I know that that wouldn't cover everything, but that would be some step in the right direction.
Well, I will not speak for the federal government as a whole, but I think right now CISA, being a relatively new player in this cybersecurity field, in our current role, we are trying to get the information out, and that's the number one thing, is we're trying to get information out. And right now we're herding cats on working to get the federal government's networks up and secure. We're constantly publishing what the new threats are, and we're constantly publishing new guidance of when federal agencies have to install certain patches so that they're secure against some of those vulnerabilities that we found. But when it comes to dictating what the private industry is doing, obviously I think that would be more of a we'd need legislative approval to do something like that, which to the best of my knowledge, we don't currently have. But again, I'm just going to go back to, I think we need to work collectively, and as was mentioned, every time we have a meeting, whether it's at a Grange or whether it's a national organization meeting, you need to talk about these topics and keep hammering them home. It's like retirement planning. You might hear it 10 times, and finally on the 11th time you decide, well, I need to really actually do that. So I think that's the key at this point, is just hammering it home that you need to be concerned about these issues, and you need to take steps, and you need to ask questions. And you know, that even goes into having a coach or a mentor to help you along. You know, I'm not the smartest guy when it comes to cybersecurity, but if I can ask someone that's a little bit smarter and they can help me, then I'm that much better off.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rick. And Dr. Adeline, one last question.
Just quickly, so one of the ways to deal with the situation is collect data. Has there been dialogue about what agency might collect data on when there has been an attack on agricultural or production agriculture?
I know that if we're informed about it, you know, we have some data. I know the FBI, if they're informed, they have information available, or well, they have the information in their own databases. Uh, and that's why in the last year, CISA and the FBI have formed a very strong bond. So if someone reports, you know, for example, let's just say Colonial Pipeline calls up and says we were hacked, that information goes immediately to the other organization so that we know what's going on. I won't say that we have we necessarily have access to everything the FBI has historically. And unfortunately, a lot of agencies out there, you know, it's almost like restricted data. Once they get it, they don't want to share it. And sometimes it's because they can't share that information. It's not because they don't want to, it's they can't share that information because of the agreements they have signed with whoever provided some of that information.
Sure.
So
Thank you.
does that answer?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Thanks, sir. Appreciate it.
Well, Rick, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us to collate the information, make it available to this task force members. Very informative, and really want to thank you for your time, both here and in preparation for this. And we really appreciate it. And I think this is a very interesting topic, but also very vast. And you've been able to really condense it for what we need to cover here today in a short period of time. So really appreciate your efforts here.
Thank you. And I appreciate all the great questions and comments from the audience. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. You do the same. Okay, moving on to the next topic, which will be the future of ag production. Kurt Blades, I believe you are on. I thought I saw you there. Yep, you're here. And in the presentation will be coming up here in a second. But in the meantime, before we get to that, I know you've brought a couple of guests with you. One is already here. But maybe what we'll do is a quick round of introduction about who you are and what you do, and then we'll move on into the presentation.
Very good. Thank you, Teddy. And I put slides forward here, but we don't necessarily plan to be working off of slides. So I can't see what you're seeing. So hopefully you see a screen, but I'm going to stop for a second and then I will pull it back up. So hold on. I'm making technology work today. Thank you for the opportunity to chat before the group today. My name is Kurt Blades. I serve as Senior Vice President for the Association of Equipment Manufacturers. If you're not familiar with our group, we represent off-road equipment in 5 sectors: ag, construction, forestry, mining, and utilities. And by off-road equipment, that includes things such as the storied brands you'd be familiar with, including Kubota, who's on the screen here today, Caterpillar, John Deere, Case, but also including technology organizations like Topcon, as Mike is represented in the group, or some of his competitors, along with the entire supply chain that supports those industries. We are pretty active involved in sort of various issues that make sure that those industries can work in a very thoughtful way. And what we're prepared to talk about here today, kind of per invitation from Teddy, thank you, is a project that we put forward called the Future of Project, and it's part of the AEM Futures Council, which represents executives from across all of our sectors. to really try to dive in on what are the things that are going to impact our industries for the next few years. Today, we're going to specifically talk about a project that you have in your white paper called The Future of Food Production. It's really dangerous to be a predictor. We all know that when Bill Gates wrote his book, The Road Ahead, he didn't include anything about the internet. So we're all kind of vulnerable when you talk about the future. So we want to be really careful when we put together a study like this. So I want to clarify what this study is and what it isn't. There's lots of research out there. There's lots of papers out there that speak to what the future of agriculture is going to look like, what the future of food production is going to look like. What makes this particular study unique and different, and why it's relevant to the group here today, is how the paper came together, and it was an industry consensus of 20 to 50 people, depending on the topic, where we sort of sat in rooms and discussed and talked about the ideas and what the impact would be under the lens of what's going to happen in a very practical nature within the next 5 to 10 years of production agriculture. And that is an important time frame to put in there, especially as we look at the task that's before you as a committee, is that the work that we're talking about with this study is things that are not on the future horizon, but they're absolutely on the near-term horizon. And so we put those things forward. So what we have in the study, and you had the white paper for your pre-read, is a look at 12 trends that sort of point to where the future of food production is going to go. Well, we've got with our colleagues today on the panel, Michael Gomes, who you're familiar with, and Ben Smith, who also serves on one of the subcommittees for the FCC, will be sharing some time with us, walking through some very high-level points of what this study is, hoping that you've all had a chance to read it, but really a conversation and questions that just allow us to have a dialogue about what this study tells us, as well as how this impacts broadband. So we're going to start with me turning it to Mike to give a brief overview of the 13 trends, and then he will turn it to Ben to give a little bit of an overview of 2 of them specifically that are incredibly relevant to this group, especially given the previous conversation about cybersecurity. So Mike and Ben, it's yours. And if you need me to pull up any slides, just tell me what ones to go to.
Sure thing. Thanks, Kurt. And so kind of when you begin to look at the white paper, instead of going through the 13 different slides that we have there, we thought and speaking to each one of them, you can kind of begin to group these slides into kind of 3 what you consider mega trends, or even kind of basically underlying themes. And I guess the first would be doing more with less. The second would be traceability and shorter supply chains. And then the third is evolution of the business models, right? And so kind of in the first one, right, in doing more with less, whether you look at trend number 1 on producing more with a lighter environmental impact, right, or more optimization of water, or the increased global demand for protein, basically it's the idea that there's a hungry world out there, that agriculture is providing food, fiber, fuel, fauna, and all those things are kind of going along, and the idea that the world has an appetite for these things, and that agriculture in renewable and sustainable begin to fit into those things. And so that's kind of one of the big underlying themes. Kind of probably the second one is really, it's along the lines of traceability and the shorter supply chains, right? And so whether that's elements of a shorter food supply chain and things like locally grown, or it's elements of improved transparency, right, to maintain consumer trust, right? People are interested in how people are growing things, how their food is grown, and some of those kind of pieces. And so it's elements of kind of in the context of this FCC committee, it's the connectivity and the data and being able to use that in the downstream context of traceability, right? And understanding if what is being marketed as organic truly was organic, and grown that way. If it's being represented as X, does it truly have those characteristics, or does it truly meet that performance standard type thing? And then that kind of starts to lead you towards the third big trend of the evolution of the business models, right? And that begins to get further open, right? In the fact that now people are beginning to for example, corn, right? And so corn has been consumed, but the idea that now you can have high ethanol corn for biofuels, and biofuels as a replacement for fossil fuels, right, begins to start to come in, or it's elements of farmers that are adjusting to emission standards or regulations, right, and or pieces as the connectivity gap is narrowing, understanding how those things are going, and or even elements of how a very strong industry like ours that is so assets intensive is beginning to look at things like crowdfunding sources and elements of how investments are paid for and some of those kinds of things. And so in short, when you begin to look at the 13 different trends, I kind of break them down to those 3 mega trends, right? Doing more with less, traceability and the shorter supply chains, as well as the evolution of the business models and really where we see that going. And I'd like to frame this context that this paper was put together in the context of, okay, industry executive group, look forward 10 years and what do you see, right? And so that we tried to make it kind of an arm's length look, so that then to give you kind of a viewpoint. And so when Teddy says, hey, where might we look, I thought that this would be a good example, and I'll hand it off to Ben.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have the opportunity to talk about this. And as Kurt mentioned earlier, the introductory presentation that we just sat through is very, very fitting for some of the trends that we really wanted to pick out and talk to you all about in today's discussion leading up to the panel discussion. So one of the 13 trends that we identified as a working group was the connectivity gap, and that connectivity gap really narrowing. If we skip ahead to slide 11, Kurt, if you're following along, or whoever's got the presentation rights, you'll start to see here that really there's an opportunity, right? And that opportunity is to prioritize connectivity. And really it's about trying to do some things like we talked about in shortening those supply chains. And so one of the things that we know has already happened is we've got the opportunity to capitalize on some of the infrastructure bill that's been passed, right? And that's really about improving connectivity. If you think about it, connectivity is really the linchpin for precision agriculture. And it's an enabling technology. And really, as we move into the future, we're going to have new technology and better technology. And so really, as we think about the bipartisan bill, this is an opportunity to put actions into words, or put actions behind words. And as we think ahead, these new technologies such as 5G that was mentioned, that really enables us to do things that we think we'll be able to do in the future. And as you can kind of see here from the graphic that's pulled together, it's access to everything all the time. And honestly, that's what's going to be needed. But one of the things to think about is that agriculture needs a voice. And that voice really needs to be heard as we're trying to address the opportunity of feeding the world's growing population. And more specifically, I'm talking about rural America here, and the opportunity to look beyond where we have some lower population densities. And I can tell you from some of the work that I've been a part of in one of the sub-task force groups, that looking at lands and underserved lands and those types of things is really, again, tying into the work that the vision team here at AEM focused on, and saying that there's a need to bring this connectivity gap, and that in the future we believe that the connectivity gap will really be narrowed. So again, we're excited about that. And as we look at slide 13, and what you'll see on slide 13 is really moving into cybersecurity. This is one of those that I remember as a working group getting together and talking about cybersecurity. And honestly, there's been a couple of things that's happened within our working group to some of our member companies when it comes to cybersecurity and ransomware and those types of things. And obviously, as a group here today and working through this presentation, or at least listening to the previous presenter, I couldn't have done a better job of teeing up. This is a topic and this is a trend that needs to be looked at and evaluated, because quite honestly, agriculture is not immune to the threat of cybersecurity. And it actually kind of starts to get me a little excited and a little bit nervous. And I really hate to use that word at times, but think about this. As our working group really thought about the future of agriculture and the future of food production, we started to think about the modern farm. And Rick even showed it, the smart farm. The future of the farm increases automation, or so we think. And when we have that increase in automation coupled with increases in connectivity, we really run an increased risk at hacking and cybersecurity. To make this more real, everyone that has been listening to some of the reports and been involved in agriculture probably knows this story. But on May 1st of this year, CNN reported the fact that a large number of ag equipment or farm equipment machinery were disabled because of the threat of it being used by Russian invaders. So $5 million worth of equipment was disabled. Well, that quickly led to a reaction. And the reaction of those forces were to double down, if not increase efforts at figuring out a way to overcome this disabled farm equipment and hack into it and be able to use it. So this is a really good and strong example of the fact that, again, agriculture is not immune. And so if you also think about the Internet of Things, which is a passion of mine as a person that looks into the future, helps not only guide the industry through AEM efforts, but also guide the company that I work for, we really need the ability to capitalize on the Internet of Things to be able to accomplish our mission of feeding the world's growing population. But it also becomes strategically important that we continue to look at cybersecurity, because the Internet of Things really unlocks the ability to be competitive on a global scale. It also increases our productivity, but it also impacts national security. And again, cybersecurity and data, it's vital to the future, shortening those supply chains, but then also the threat against the fact that now with connected machines, you have some of the vulnerabilities. And that's pretty much an unintended consequence of connectivity. But don't kid yourself, we need that connectivity in the future going forward for food security. So food security, cybersecurity, shortening supply chains, we need that intensified look at making sure that we don't ignore the threat within agriculture. Kurt?
So thank you, Ben and Mike. And again, we're a little unrehearsed here. So what we had planned here was for at this point, Teddy has got a couple of prepared questions, as well as we will be in a position to entertain questions from the floor. So Teddy, I will turn it back to you.
Great, thank you, Kurt. And again, for all the task force members, if you have a question, please use your hand. I'll call upon you. And I also, Kurt, I appreciate that you brought up this slide that shows the 13 trends. So one question as the rest of the task force is formulating, I'd say, is when you look at the conflict, for example, in between Ukraine and Russia, like, have any of these trends been accelerated compared to maybe the path or the trajectory they were on before that? And even beyond that conflict, COVID before that, right? So there may have been some things that we have thought, okay, yeah, this is going to happen at some point, but now, because of some of these macro things that have happened, now it's on an accelerated path.
Well, I'll take a start here and then let whoever weigh in on this. One thing I heard a speaker say a couple of weeks ago when I was in DC said, war brings focus. And I think that was an interesting way to frame it up. I think Ben mentioned specifically the conflict in the Ukraine brought forward the very real issue around cybersecurity in a practical way. I think that's clearly the one of the most obvious ones. But the second one, when you can take a look at the supply chain challenges that we've certainly have all been witness to, both professionally and personally, I think you could say that those are directly related to Ukraine situation, as well as COVID in general. And then I think that the pandemic brought just a level of scrutiny to food production and food security that we hadn't seen before. And so just to kind of round it out, and I'll let whoever wants to weigh in after that. There's focus on these, and it really accelerated many of these inevitable trends, but brought them to light in a way that that probably would have eventually happened, but brought them a little faster.
Yeah, no, I'll add to that really quick. And the one that I'll add is the farm ownership. You know, we've kind of seen the national average of the, or I should say, the national age of the average farmer really start to grow in years over the years. So we're up to about 59 and a half. And I think what you're going to see in the next census report that comes out is the fact that that's starting to move the other way. And I think a lot of that is being driven by the pandemic and the desire to actually move out and move out into and get a little space between where you have to work. And that's really accelerated by the ability to work remotely. And again, a lot of that is being pushed by the pandemic, in my opinion.
I would also say probably a little bit of number 5 in the fact that it's not just how the shifts that are occurring geographically in weather patterns, but also geopolitically, whether that's the sources of fertilizer or even the markets for grain, right? Specifically, Russia and Ukraine are large producers of grain, maybe or maybe not necessarily to the United States, but to most of Africa and parts of Latin America. And so that reverberation into the supply chain or into that begins to affect, right? It has in the law of unintended consequences, it has a ripple effect into the other markets, right? And so things start to move around. And I would say that would be the only other one that I would pick up in that one.
Great. Thank you to all three of you. I mean, that was a great demonstration of how the geopolitical impact to agriculture, and then even the acceleration of technology in a lot of cases. So Joy, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you very much. My question has to do with bandwidth and the need for symmetry. My sense is that the download speeds need to be equal to the upload speeds. Do you agree with that?
I'll take that one. And so I think in the last report from this committee, the short answer is yes, a nearly symmetrical service standard is by far the thing that we need the most, right? Now, whether that's 100-100 or 100-100 is not required everywhere. But the idea of a nearly symmetrical service standard, because increasingly the idea that data from smart equipment has to have the ability to go up, right? And as we talked about, right, specifically with cybersecurity, one of the ways to improve cybersecurity is to take your business to a cloud-based repository so that then it's automatically backed up and things like that. If we're going to do that, we can't do that unless we have rural connectivity. And so I would say that's my 2 cents. I don't know about my fellow panelists.
Yeah, I'll add to that just a little bit and add to the fact that we need to think about this holistically and not just a single solution when it comes to providing connectivity. You know, there is technology today, technology that's right on the cusp of being turned on when it comes to bandwidth and it comes to connectivity. And we've got to continue to strive forward in finding ways, because the future is going to be heavy on upload and download. Now, obviously, we can manage some of that with packages sizes and some of those other types of things, whether it's store and forward type when we need it. But most likely, we are going to need better and higher speeds in the fields, not just at the homesteads.
I'll add a final point in that it's. I remember some early conversations, actually, Ben, I believe it was with you and me and a similar group, where we said, you know, its consistency matters as much as the size of the pipe. We obviously want a big pipe that goes up and down, but it's consistency. So gaps create real challenges. Gaps in connectivity create real challenges for the technology to really be able to live up to its full potential.
Dr. Bajo, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Teddy. Again, thanks for a great presentation and sharing your report with us all. My question is, I am representing the connectivity mapping work group here. So I'm going to ask this question to Ben first, since he is part of our working group. In our discussions, our charge is to map connectivity gaps. In our discussion, cybersecurity has never come as an aspect. And I am wondering what your thoughts are about how we as the task force and as the working group should be addressing cybersecurity.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I also think it's a really good topic to start to incorporate into some of our thinking. I think one of the things I would say first is we've got to understand where we've got our gaps, right? And I think cybersecurity is a part of that too, from the standpoint that once you have more universal or ubiquitous coverage across the nation, now all of a sudden it's going to accelerate or potentially accelerate some of that cybersecurity. So I think, in my opinion, we've got to first get an understanding and get that level of connectivity up. But at the same time, we also have to understand, how does that increase the threat of cybersecurity, and how might we address that threat increase? I don't know, Mike, if you want to add to that.
I think we've covered it pretty well, and we've hit on a bunch of it. But certainly, you see cybersecurity as because cloud-based systems do offer more security, the idea of multi-factor authentication and elements of these things, right, are important. I get the hard part is that we live in a world of old equipment, right? Old farm equipment never dies; it just finds a more economical home. And so it's being able to get to some elements of those, because when you buy a new piece of farm equipment today, it's got a lot of safety and security already built into it. And so I think that there's quite a bit there.
Thank you.
Dr. Adeline?
Thanks for a great presentation. And as I looked at this slide of 13 issues, the thing that came to mind is protein sources, and besides the terrestrial ones. As seafood becomes a bigger part of what we consume as protein, offshore farming, or even in big lakes and ponds. So should we start to map those areas? Basically, in unserved, we've eliminated those possibilities. Have we limited ourselves? Should we be thinking about it? How should we look at this?
I'll start us off with a response to give Ben and Mike a chance to put their thoughts together. Note the careful wording on this particular trend. Increased global demand for protein. And I think for decades, the conversation has been and the narrative has been, as economies, as societies grow up, they tend to adopt more animal protein. And we don't see anything that really points to that trend disappearing. However, there are some things that point to, plant-based, and you say non-terrestrial and other things such as that. I think we gave very, very careful consideration to that. And as we look at, again, 10 years out specifically with this paper, but also looking with an eye to the future, I think, it's a little bit unknown what is out there. I think what we do have to recognize is that the technology today that we are comfortable with, and the technology that we know, absolutely applies to terrestrial-based, land-based, and that's where the connectivity needs to go. It only stands to reason that same technology is scalable to other areas, such as the seas or other things such as that. But I don't know that there is an immediate need for that, given that, again, focusing on the next 5 to 10 years, I don't know that technology would move there that quickly. But it's certainly something that needs to be in the consideration set for, a phase 2 or a phase 3.
As the resident Californian, I mean, we cover quite a bit of the coast, right? And so whether you're talking about protein from abalone farms, or you're talking about kelp farms or those kinds of things, they're generally within a 6-mile proximity to, to coastal land. So I would say that you're covering most of it. And then when you begin to think of like offshore platforms or those kinds of things, which are really corner cases, but they have very high accuracy GNSS today, right? Matter of fact, they use RTK because that's how they determine, right? And they use a privatized correction source because they are corner cases, right? So it's not like they don't have access. And so I think it's really universal access or universal low cost access. And I would say, some of those would be more corner cases, but I think it's a great consideration, Dr. Adeline.
One thing to add to that, and it's a little bit of maybe a known, but I know it was a conversation that this work group had while talking about connectivity and talking about really the demand for protein, not just animal, but also plant-based proteins, which would also include marine-based. Here's the concept. The concept is the fact that it's easy to understand where the population, the human population is. That's an easy to track thing. And obviously with the subgroup work that I'm a part of with FCC and Dr. Adeline's a part of as well, we're trying to say, how do we look beyond that? And it's really easy to understand. And I think we even came up with the tagline, and hopefully this comes across right. But people vote, but plants don't. And it's easy to understand and put a lot of effort into understanding where that population density. So to answer your question is, we need to look at understanding not just the densely populated geographies, but also those other areas. And I think to Mike's point, we probably have some of the coastal areas covered, but we need to look at other areas that, again, don't have that population density.
Thank you.
Heather?
Okay. Great. I'm going to try to do a triple play with my question here. So coming from the Connectivity Needs Working Group, we've got questions related to interoperability standards, not only between colors of paint, but also legacy type. Like Michael said, I love what you said. There's really no old farm equipment doesn't die. It just finds a new use. We had some issues with our GS4 monitor not wanting to communicate with the planter that's really not that old. But so interoperability, and then two other questions, which I think may be related to each other, but does AEM have any kind of annual effort to capture what you think that data gap is, kind of a better description or identifiers of the data gap and where the needs exist and how that's growing by use cases or scenarios? Like I say, it's two questions. One was annual data summary. I typed it of use cases and data quality needs, and also any documentation of the connectivity gap, either by geographical location or by use case in terms of the types of crops or products, because we've been told repeatedly, we really can't, it's pretty onerous for us to try to survey, but if you already have some existing data surveying your members, that'd be great.
Well, I'll take a first stab at this, and I guess it's appropriate to call out the great engineering that leads to those tractors and combines that can stay on the market for a very long time. It's a blessing and a curse. I'd also want to address, I think you had three parts there. The first one of those being interoperability. And yeah, I can sense your pain as a farmer, and that same conversation I've had multiple times. I'm sure Ben and Mike have had the same ones, where the interoperability challenges are real. And I will say just emphatically, we hear you and we're working on it. I mean, the technology is moving so quickly and the innovation is moving so quickly that the standards just haven't had a chance to fully catch up. And one of the big challenges that both Ben and Mike are involved with within AEM is a kind of an executive level conversation of how do we solve these interoperability challenges. We're working closely with a global organization called the Ag Industry Electronics Foundation, or AEF, that is supporting the ISOBUS standard. But that only works if it's fully adopted, both at the end user level, the farmer level, but also at the manufacturing level. So that work is underway. I don't have a lot of progress to support other than saying that we're working towards it. As it relates to the data gaps, that's a very good question, and I'd love to maybe even speak offline with some of your specific needs, because that does sound like something that collectively we might be able to help you get somewhat of the picture. I'm not aware of any AEM studies that we've done on that. We've done a couple of things about adoption, and we've done some things geographically that points to different crops where you can make some extrapolations. But we haven't spoke specifically about that. So I'd be interested in having a conversation of what your needs are and seeing if we can fill that out. Ben, Mike, you might have a little bit more insight of what some of the data that you've been able to use.
Well, I'll take the one on the interoperability for Heather. Kurt had touched on ISO 11783 and the idea of tractor implement connectivity, right? And that actually is going along pretty well. But as Kurt related, in many cases, from a global manufacturer standpoint, it's pretty easy to get, right? Because you can, if you do have that interoperability, you can sell that equipment around the world, which is good, right? But for smaller localized manufacturers that maybe only serve parts of the US or a region, they may or may not want to become part of that standard. And so you see some of those. And so we're always fighting that. On the data interoperability side, there's a separate association called Ag Gateway that's done a great job of establishing the standards and implementing those. And so I'd be happy to get us more information on that. And so I would say that interoperability is a strong piece through the industry. And so I say, it's not like people aren't trying to get there, right? It's a very complex problem. And so that's my 2 cents. Ben, how about you?
Well,
Yeah.
first, Michael, let me just interject for one moment. If you have personal connection with Brent Kemp with Ag Gateway,
Do
I had sent him an ask, wondering if he or someone could speak to us, our working group, on I think August 25th.
Consider it done. I'll take that for you.
Shit, nice. I'll call you with some other needs later. Thank you. Sorry to
No
interrupt.
problem. I know those guys well, but I've spent a bunch of time with them this week, so no problem. Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to add to this a little bit, I love Michael's comment about, ag equipment never dies. Some of the equipment that I personally own is a little bit older than you might imagine. But the point here is the fact that technology is really rapid and dynamic, and to some degree, the level of adoption varies, right? I've got a brand new piece of equipment that's hooked up to a really older piece of equipment, and that's what creates some of this interoperability challenge. And I know that there are other challenges that we also see where it's a newer piece of equipment, and as you mentioned before, it's a planter that's not that old. And I completely understand, completely feel the pain. I've been in those positions before, trying to help folks work through that. But it's amazing how fast our technology can move. And again, we're always trying to find ways to do reverse compatibility, and the efforts of Ag Gateway, the efforts of AEM, the efforts of AEF, and I know I'm throwing out lots of acronyms here because I'm really good at that, but we actually are trying to work together. And as Kurt said before, there are task forces within the Association of Equipment Manufacturers that get together routinely and have this conversation and continue to work to push the needle. And I guess the one last thing I would say is it's an effort, it's a journey, and we're working on that journey.
Thank you. I muted myself. Thanks.
Thank you. Dale?
Yes, thanks for the opportunity. This is, to me, has been one of those fascinating subjects to listen to. You guys were talking about the pipeline of connectivity. Because of the seasonality of agriculture, there's going to be days when I use terabytes, and there's going to be days when I use zero transfer of data. What does that do to the need for infrastructure in terms of me being to access from my farm to the cloud? and then there are a great many days that I don't use it at all. Does that system have to be overbuilt? And how does that add cost?
I'll take part of it in the fact that I think, Dale, that what you speak to was the first question we had, right? It's the symmetrical service standard, right? It's the idea that you build the road for the total overall traffic and then you manage the traffic, right? And so I think that there's also something to be said for in many cases, connectivity billing plans are averaged over long periods of time. And so that's where in some cases you can allow the average to work for you rather than against you, right? But in some cases, it comes down to how much can you run through the pipe, right? And it's that nearly symmetrical service standard and the idea that the world needs bigger pipes, right? When we went from, we're in the process of shifting the US from a 25.3 as a standard to 100, ideally a near symmetrical 100 symmetrical service standard, right? But even on a broadband 120, right, standard. And so you certainly see pieces of that. But I'll let Kurt or Ben weigh in.
Yeah, I think so. I feel your pain because I've been in the field doing some research at times, and I'm amazed at just how much data we can collect today, right? And the concept of this white paper was to think about in the future, 10 years from now. In fact, I was having this conversation with a coworker this morning. I said, look at this thing. It can collect terabytes of data in a day, right? And obviously, we don't use all of that data today. However, as we think about the future, and I go back to some of the things that talked about in this white paper, and more specifically leading into the panel discussion, we're going to need to find new technology that enables us to capture that terabyte per day, say during harvest or during planting, and then be able to scale or utilize packaging or utilize some different technology to allow us to be able to fit that big, heavy data load through some type of connectivity. The other thing I would leave with is the fact that as we think about in the future, it's our vision through this vision team work that most likely we're going to be doing more passes, more applications, or more types of things with the crops that we grow from an agricultural standpoint, or even monitoring the cattle that we raise. All of those things lead to more data more frequently. So therefore, to answer your question, in my opinion, we're going to need to build this for the future that has larger data sets that are more consistently being uploaded and downloaded throughout the year.
I'll put a final point on that, and sort of to Ben's piece here is we don't know what we don't know. I mean, we who would have thought the demands that are placed on the mobile networks are what they are 30 years ago when they were built out. But all of a sudden, there's a couple of game-changing technologies that change those demands in a very big way. And so when I put forward the slide here about the artificial intelligence enables insight-driven farming, there are packets of data, there are layers of data that we just literally haven't had the capacity or the computing capacity to really be able to explore. When we start to dive into that, we might find that as Ben talks about multiple passes done remotely at a lot of different times, we might find that this level of precision goes up exponentially based on what is available. But literally, we just don't know. So I think that's where you kind of say the infrastructure has got to be built for the first of all is built to scale so it can go up as the needs increase. But also, as I said before, it needs to be consistent and reliable.
Right. I'm not seeing any other hands from the task force members. Again, if you have more questions, please raise your hand. But from my standpoint, again, you cover agriculture. It's a big sector for you, obviously, but you also have the other 4 or 5 that you mentioned earlier, Kurt. So what can we learn from those other sectors? Are they ahead in some cases? Are they behind in some cases? Just what are some of the lessons we can draw as you see it across different sectors that would be applicable to ag?
That's fair. Thank you, Teddy. That's a good question. I'll take this to start, and I'm sure my colleagues will have a perspective as well. One of the things we found when we did this paper and its companion paper, The Future of Building, the level of similarities between the two, and I will make available that same Future of Building paper to this task force so we can put it out there, because it addresses a lot of those same concerns. And when you think about a construction project, and let's use an interstate as an example, a lot of those are happening in C and D counties where they're using that same connectivity network that we might have built specifically for rural areas for agriculture or for another need. The rural needs are the rural needs, and the technology is very much transferring between the two. Here's an interesting observation though that we found between construction equipment broadly defined and ag equipment broadly defined. So ag would include ag and forestry, and construction would include construction, mining, and utility is kind of how we're lumping those together. Construction equipment, because of the ownership, because of the way it is utilized, it tends to focus a whole lot on the machine efficiency. So things like fuel burn and location of the machine. The technology is really focused on how the owner or the operator or the contractor can get the most out of the machine in that particular asset. By comparison, so we call that telematics data. By comparison, the ag industry has built its entire focus around precision agriculture on the output data, or what we learn when we put a crop in the field and how can we make that crop better. What is interesting right now is that those two are converging. So there is a ton of energy within the ag space to become better at telematics data and do more from the machines to optimize the machines. And on the flip side, the construction market is looking very closely at the output data to do a better job. So we're finding this convergence of the two technologies. And one of the great things about the chair that I get to set in right now is finding those cross-pollinations that probably wouldn't have happened before, but where we can see that, hey, this is a cool little bit of technology we learned in the mining space. How can we apply that to farming, and how can we apply that to forestry to really accelerate the technology and innovation that really create this sustainable world that we're trying to live in?
Kurt, as part of that, do you want to just touch on for a brief moment, talk a little bit about the smart connected mine, or talk a little bit about how remote, how forestry equipment is operated because it is so remote? Just touch on those couple of things for a quick minute for the group.
Yeah, see, call me out a little bit, so I might be a little over my skis on what's available. So I would encourage you to do a little of your own homework as well. But mines, and specifically in some of the countries outside of the U.S., you think about a mine. A mine is kind of in the middle of nowhere. There's not a lot of people around, and as a result, it is not burdened with some of the same challenges we have when we're trying to put precision agriculture or autonomous equipment into a field situation or a construction situation, because we're not having to worry about people. We're not having to worry about things. Maybe the mine's operating underground, and so you're really saving lives by not having a warm body attached to that machine. So that's a fascinating case study, because we're looking very closely at that as ways to establish sort of proof of concept, but also proof of safety and safe operation of these technologies where they've been operating for years in areas, but just haven't had the same level of scrutiny that you might have when you're in a farm into a city area. So that's why we're working closely with organizations like OSHA, and specifically in California, Cal OSHA, and even EPA and other groups, as we look to adopt precision ag technology and autonomous equipment. I don't want to limit our thinking specifically to look at the ag industry for examples of success, because the mining industry has done a lot of really cool things. The construction industry has done a lot of cool things. Heck, the forestry industry up in some underpopulated areas up north have done some pretty cool things, and that technology is transferable across sectors.
Joy has a hand up.
Thank you very much. Do you track where venture capital is going to give some indication of what the future holds?
We do, because it's fascinating, and That's what we tried to capture this with our trend. I misspoke earlier and I said 12 trends because actually we ended up adding a 13th trend after we were done because we said, hey, actually they all culminate into one thing. And one thing that has happened is the pandemic has put a lot of attention on the food supply. It's also put a lot of focus on the food supply. And that creates some really interesting dynamics in terms of where the money is coming from, but also what that money is intended to do. A whole lot of focus, as we all know, about plant-based meats being a large source of where some of those VC funds have gone. But there's a whole lot of additional focus on traceability. There's a lot of focus on indoor farming. There is a ton of outside money pouring into the ag industry that is perhaps not burdened with the same legacy that Mike, Ben, and I might have. That's kind of will add some creative thinking. What are the implications of that? I don't know, but it's going to be different. I mean, when a company like IKEA is pouring billions of dollars into the ag industry, they're doing things differently than maybe Kubota does, or different than Topcon does, and that's going to have implications on the innovation as well as the priorities.
Yeah, and to add to that, it's a new way of thinking, right? A new way of doing business, and much like this slide says, a new business model. And Kurt, you touched on this. We have a legacy. It's really a momentum, right? We have a way of doing business that creates a profit as a business, and obviously that helps us do things both for the communities that we work in and the greater good of the global population, more specifically feeding, sheltering, providing clean, fresh water, those things, right? But when you think about it, that creates momentum. When you bring in venture capital, that breaks free from some of those things that we traditionally do, and it changes the thinking. And what's really fascinating and exciting to me about this is the fact that there's a challenge that we all face and we're all a part of, and that is feeding the world's growing population, because it's growing and we've got to do more with less. And that's really what Mike started with. And we start talking about the macro trends. Venture capitalism gives us a unique way of looking at this problem and challenge through a different lens.
Yeah, so I would say that, the thing that I would add is I think last year, $12 billion flew into agriculture, ag tech, and food tech as sectors. And so you've seen a huge influx of startups around elements of these opportunities and things that's been a very big deal. And so I would say that as people go from mechanization to automation and from automation to systems approaches, it's the work of this group and the connectivity needs that really help us propel the rate at which that occurs.
Awesome. Heather?
So being a farmer, sitting here and listening to this, but also trying to just take care of business day to day, and yet innovate as we can, either afford to, in terms of the time needed to learn about how to innovate, the time to manage people, or the dollars to do it. We have, even in our farm and in our family, we're asking ourselves, what does a farmer actually look like? And I'll say to you, although some still farm too, but to you in industry, what do we really look like 10 to 15 years from now? Because whenever I was just at the Wall Street Journal's Global Food Forum last month, and when someone who is looking for $100 million for one indoor growing facility to grow 2 types of crops and to build out 5 of those, and they're calling themselves a farmer, that is definitely a different model. So I guess it's more of an open-ended question. I know it's not specific to precision agriculture, but it is in direct connection to our future. And we've talked about trying to reach every field, every acre, dealing with legacy equipment and the realities of farming, and to still surge forward and seize some of this opportunity. So I'd really like your input on that.
Well, I love that question. And as Ben and Mike can attest, this is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. I think indoor farming is fascinating. And it is a ground shift. It is amazing what we've learned from some of the industries that might have had to operate underground for a while that all of a sudden are now, legal. There's a whole different pipeline that developed that built efficiencies and built high levels of precision under glass that we haven't been able to that we're kind of being able to take advantage of in large scale production agriculture. So what does the farmer of the future look like? It could look very, very vastly different than it does today. What the definition is, what the machines that they use are. But I did want to bring up something that kind of touches on this, and it's point 12 of our study here, is that the idea of farm ownership models change. And this is sort of based on the economic reality. And I'll use my own farm as an example. I'm a farm kid from Missouri, Northeast Missouri. We farm about 6,000 acres. And we have recently been going through some succession planning, and it's specifically designed to deal with the transfer of the land. And what we have done, and many farms have done this as well, where we have separated the land from the farm, because the land is an asset that we have to protect and figure out a way to transfer that from a generation to generation. And the farm is a business that can come and go. And that's a very different mentality of the way than the way farming has been approached in the past. But it's happening over and over and over again. So I think when you find that my family has been operating on the same land for over 100 years, we had an economic need that was easily met because we had this asset of land that could always sustain us during the high parts and the low parts. But as land is no longer part of that farm business, but rather it is a separate balance sheet, it changes the business model because that ownership has changed. And I think that changes the dynamics of how people purchase their inputs, how they purchase their equipment, the decisions that they make. And this is a very real thing that's happening simply because of the generational changes in land ownership over the next few years.
Yeah, and I kind of add to that, I'll add a little bit of story. I much like Kurt, only a little bit different. I grew up in upstate New York on a dairy farm, and I remember my dad always telling me, farming is milking cows and raising crops and those types of things. And I remember getting away and moving to the Midwest because of the fact that the farm was small. But the fact is that agriculture is not just milking cows and raising crops or raising crops and livestock and those types of things. And to answer your question, the farm of the future is really undefined, in my opinion, but it's different, vastly different. And it includes things like indoor farming. It includes things like separating and running the business in a different way. And it's fascinating, it's exciting, and it's buckle your seatbelts. This is going to be a lot of fun. We have a lot of technology. In the future, we'll have better connectivity. We'll have new technology that we haven't seen yet. And I'm a believer, glass half full. We're going to feed the world's growing population, and we're going to do it better than we've ever done it before. And it's because of folks like yourself, Heather, that are farming today, and Kurt farming today, and the folks that are coming into farming, like I'm trying to do, coming back to farming.
Thank you. Dr. Adeline?
So if I can build on Heather's question and add climate change into that, should we be concentrating on the shifts that are occurring as we map connectivity and say, we really need to concentrate connectivity first, understanding we're going to roll out over, you can't do this like that. And so we're going to have to, but should we be concentrating in those shifts and where climate is pushing to grow crops in a different area than we have been?
In short, yes. There's an article in Fortune that just came out last week with a video with my good friend Cody Carson, who's in West Texas, a farmer from West Texas, farms several thousand acres of dry land in West Texas, and his reality is, you get more water, he's got to change what he does. And so it's just reality that the Corn Belt is moving further north, and that crops are moving further north. And so I think as you're doing your future planning and you're building your infrastructure, absolutely take into consideration what these geographic shifts are going to look like. I can't predict what they're going to be, but we certainly know that it's good, that everything is going to be a little bit further north than it is today.
Julie has a question.
Thanks, Teddy. I'm going to hop on Heather's question as well. And I really think the farmer of the future depends on how successful we are at providing adequate connectivity to them. For example, to accomplish all 12 of your initiatives, you need connectivity. For a bio-based economy, farmers are the heroes of bio-based economy, but if they can't tell their story through connectivity, we're not going to be able to take that as a success. To lower water, connectivity, traceability, water management footprints. Thank you guys. But that's our job, and we have to execute on that as a country, or we're not going to get here. So thank you for a great presentation. It really helps put things into perspective and shows the importance of our work.
Thank you, Julie. Joy?
As the crops are shifting, does that affect our thinking about mapping?
You know, I'll take a stab at this one first, and I want to say that yes and no. Okay, so the yes part is that we believe the crops are going to shift. We're seeing some of that happen. We're seeing some water availability in certain areas. Here's the no part of it. The no part of it is that land doesn't just stop being productive. We're going to shift it into different productive outputs, and therefore there's still a need for connectivity. So although we're going to have some shifts, we're going to need the connectivity because we're going to use that for something else. Most likely it's going to be a different form of food fiber or another type of agricultural output. That's my answer.
I guess my answer is that as the value goes up, the value of connectivity goes up, right? So when you go from wheat to corn, the idea that you create more data and that you need more connectivity, to me, fits, right? When you go from corn and beans to strawberries and lettuce, the input, the traceability and the connectivity needs go up. And so I would just say the one trend I would say is that as the value of the crop goes up, the connectivity needs go up. And from there, choose your poison kind of thing.
Great. So I'll one last question. I'll build upon the last couple of comments and questions that are built there, and then we'll end it. So the last section of the paper on the new business models, right? One thing that was in there was equipment as a service. So both for Ben and Mike, and obviously Kurt, you can weigh in as well. It's now, what does connectivity mean to you now? Because that's a different way of, now you have a stake in the game, right? It's not just, oh yeah, the farmer needs connectivity to better utilize the equipment. Like you're part of that equation as well. So maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, this is a topic that I've spent a significant portion of time thinking about, working on those types of things. I couldn't agree more. You know, connectivity is the foundational building block for precision agriculture of the future. And without it, you can't really look at things like technology as a service or equipment as a service in the future, which really enables us to do one other thing that I think is critically important here, and that is to help foster adoption of new technology.
I would also kind of second that in the fact that the other side of this is it's not just equipment as a service, but it's elements of the remittance and payments electronically, right? And so I think that there's a piece of that, whether that's electronic billing, whether that's data for compliance to regulation, or whether that's element of the ability of that remote actor to be able to receive the electronic payment. And so to me, there's elements of connectivity on those that you also need to think about as things continue to merge.
Now, I'll round out with a bit of a punchline here. The Association of Equipment Manufacturers is 125 years old, or 125 years old. We've got about 1,000 members. A good quarter of those members are over 100 years old. We have a pretty rich history of adjusting our business models to meet the demands of the farmer and of the end user. And so I fully expect each individual company is going to find the way that makes sense for their businesses to continue to be profitable and sustainable, while also providing that those services that are needed to produce the food and fiber. So the innovation is going to find a way. I don't know what those business models are going to look like, whether it's software as a service or whether it's time-based. All of those are being tried. All of them are being discussed. There's no one silver bullet, but I guarantee you we'll figure out a way.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kurt. I appreciate that. And I really did appreciate that last, the section there in the document and your comments as well in the business models, because all the other stuff, obviously it enables it, right? It's sort of you need to have it in order to do it more efficiently or to grow more or to do it more with less, right? But when you talk about some of these new models, now we're talking like foundational. This is the driver. Without this model doesn't exist at all. And so that's really going to change the game. And it really speaks to the fact of why we even have this task force and why connectivity matters to precision agriculture. So with that, I really do want to thank you for your time, your willingness to be here. Want to thank the association for putting this paper together. Very useful. I think, just by the interaction and the questions you've got, you can see it's a very near and dear topic to all the task force members. So again, thanks for taking the time to be here. To present to us, and then also to answer a bunch of the questions that we had, and tease out some other insights that we didn't have before.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Yep. Thank you, Kurt. Thank you, Ben. And then thank you, Michael, as well. Okay, so it's 1:51 Eastern. We are due for a 15-minute break. So let's do the break, and we'll get back together at 15 minutes from now. Okay, welcome back, everybody, from the 15-minute break. I hope you found the two presentations earlier this morning to be informative. From both presentations, there was really good engagement, so it seemed like we hit the mark there as far as topics are concerned. And it was also interesting to see how there was a good correlation between the two areas of intersection, which is, I think, was critical and making sure that, so we brought that together and think about the future of precision agriculture and even agriculture as a whole. So with that, we'll transition to the second part of our meeting today, which will be the working group updates. So each group will have about 15 minutes or so to present. I believe if you have sent your information in, that will be shared on the screen. So with that, we will start with the first working group update, which would be the mapping and analyzing connectivity in agricultural lands. So I believe, Dr. Bajwa, you are on, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ted. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
All right. Can you see the presentation?
And we can see the presentation too.
Okay, good. Thanks, everybody. It has been a busy few months for our working group, and again, our working group and the name is Mapping and Analyzing Connectivity on Agricultural Lands. We also have a couple of members of the working group here, so I would ask them to step up and contribute or add on to the report. If I am missing any point. So I thought I will start with the charges. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but our working group's charges include identifying, measuring current gaps in the availability of broadband internet access and making recommendations to help FCC to obtain reliable and standardized data measurements and to reflect that data or that information in future programs focused on broadband. The work we have done so far, we kind of discussed the charges early on and decided a few areas that we need to focus on. And based on that, we formed 4 subgroups to discuss those areas. Those are mapping negative space or a gap in connectivity, particularly unserved, underserved versus served. And then multi-agency collaboration on whole farm data collection, data sharing, and maintaining public-facing ag-focused data platform. And then resources and policies to aid data mapping and analyzing. Um, and fourth one was the level of coverage, particularly mapping the level of coverage, particularly speed, strength, resolution, and all those kind of stuff. And we also, to aid with these discussions, we also had a number of presenters come and talk to us, or a number of experts come and talk to us. Some of them were part of our working group, and some of them were from outside of the working group. So then the National Association of County, I'm not sure what O is, but the NACO, they have a mapping of broadband efforts. So Tarrell Clark and Seamus Dowdall, who are also members of our working group, talked about it. And UCLA has a speed testing platform. So Luke Derricks, again, a member of the working group, talked about it. Then digitization in agriculture, we were interested in use of data in modern farming. We want to hear from machinery industry about where they are going, and so that's a presentation from AGCO. Then what other connectivity platforms are there, TV white space for data-driven agriculture, and also the perspective from the farm, connectivity data and artificial intelligence in the farm. So two of the presenters talked about that. And the FCC tracker, John Emmett came and talked about tracking in the recommendations from the last task force, and where we are, or where FCC is going with what is happening with those recommendations. And Joe Carey from Trimble talked about when it comes to connectivity, the distance versus data rate, that relationship, and all the complexities and science behind it. We also had some Patrick Ryan from Esri talk about the USDA ARS visualization platform for agriculture that brings the land cover data and the connectivity data together. And we had USGS folks, Suming Jin and John Divitz, talk about the national land cover data products. With that, I'll go into what the subgroups are talking about. It's kind of an initial recommendation, but we still need to discuss this further and combine these. So you may see some overlap between some of the talking points between the subgroups. So our first subgroup, mapping negative space. The members of the subgroups are listed there, and Michael is here. Michael Adeline is here. So their recommendation, these recommendation or these talking points are in continuation to what happened in the previous working group. What recommendations were made and what the next step should be. So some of the talking points or some of the ideas talked by this group is, if we are going to map and share that map with the public, there should be a base map layer that is the agriculture land. The question is, how do we know, or what are the agriculture lands? So if we combine the national, the USDA NAS cropland cultivated data layer, so that looks at the cultivated land, and USGS multi-resolution land characteristic consortiums and national land cover, these are two different products. National land cover data, they identify grassland or pasture land where the livestock are kept. So that is the animal agriculture land, and the NAS data provides the crop agriculture land. If we combine that data sets, and we should provide that as the base layer for this sharing, mapping, and sharing the connectivity data. And also, this map should be housed by ARS, USDA ARS for agriculturalists, with a link to FCC site for connectivity providers. So it's not only, the data should be available or readily available and accessible to both agriculture people and as well as the connectivity providers. And then the best available authoritative cropland and pastureland cover will be used over the US territories. This is because for our mainland, this data are readily available, not for, you know, Alaska, Hawaii, Puerto Rico. So that's why we are saying whatever other best available sources available or best sources available, we should be using that. And then the that is the base layer. Then the connectivity data, you know, FCC 477 and or BDC data should be used to create the current state of connectivity layer on top of that base layer. And then additional data layers will incorporate service areas of connectivity providers and the technology types not currently represented in the 477 or BDC data. And the other recommendation or other thought is that we should also provide a verification. It's not just a provider data, but a verification data layers from third-party measurements to verify coverage and performance. So this is coming because, you know, what the provider says, the connectivity available in an area and what the user experience may be different. So this is something we thought should be useful. And further layers could be considered for additional context, including existing non-commercial private networks. Oh, I'm missing something there, but and also including data from the USGS MRLC, like existing federal assets and the right-of-way data, homeland infrastructure foundation level data on cellular tower network, and also availability of unused spectrum for private network deployment, such as TV white space and the CBRS. That was our first subgroup. Our second subgroup was on focused on resources and the policies to aid mapping connectivity. So they are talking about particularly how to leverage and utilize the connections USDA, various agencies under USDA has with the farmers and their data collection effort. For example, USDA and NAS has two kinds of survey. One is done every 5 years, an agriculture census survey, and then every 2 years they do a computer use and ownership survey. They ask in the computer use and ownership survey, they ask some questions about the connectivity, but it's not very comprehensive, and there are concerns about the knowledge of the people who are responding to the survey. However, there is room to improve that survey because NASA has such a close connection with the agriculture sector or farmers and ranchers. There is room to utilize that connection to collect data from agricultural lands. Again, the concern is that today's data testing platforms are not probably focused on agricultural land. Even if we are using it, we may not collect much data over agricultural lands. So, the recommendation is to improve the NAS computer usage and ownership survey that has some questions on broadband coverage on agricultural land by including language in the upcoming farm bill to increase funding levels. NAS cannot enhance that survey without additional resources. So providing some resources to expand on that survey to support broadband mapping at the same frequency as crop production data. And also the data they collect when they convert it into maps, include that broadband connectivity. So the farm field mapping data would be converted into a publicly accessible farm field broadband map data. The second point they're talking about, that group has talked about, is establishing a USDA task force that leverages the expertise of relevant mission areas and agencies to develop interactive broadband coverage map across the lands. So this is, again, USDA has, there are multiple agencies, USDA, FCC, and other agencies, but even within USDA, there are multiple groups like rural development or ARS or NRCS or NIFA. They're all doing something different, and but there perhaps could be better coordination. So this task force will consult with the local tribal and cooperative, and agricultural stakeholders about their coverage needs, and they can also develop a comprehensive broadband coverage map on agricultural land using the existing and enhanced USDA data. And then directing, we would, the group would like to direct NIFA to establish a new competitive grant program to support rural field coordination and outreach to local and tribal producers for on-farm and agricultural land data collection and education on data collection. And one of the points under there is that land-grant universities should be a part of this effort, and they should have the ability to apply for funds and build programs that support cooperative extension involvement in education and the collection of broadband usage and adoption data. Then our subgroup 3 looked into multi-agency collaboration on data collection and sharing and public-facing data platform and a common rubric that everybody can understand. So their talking points were to direct agencies to collaborate on common goals around the data collection and or analysis. Again, there are multiple agencies and sometimes multiple groups under each agency working in this area, but there could be better collaboration and the leveraging of what each group is doing. Then combining their efforts to create or utilize third-party software to analyze or collect connectivity data, developing a common testing method so that all data are measured in the same fashion. This is a concern that if different groups are collecting data or verifying, are they comparable? Or how we can make sure that they are collecting, they are testing based on a common method and those are comparable. Then the fourth point they are talking about is to encourage and incentivize individuals to, particularly from rural agricultural area, to participate in surveys and utilizing apps or software that collects necessary data. The sort of overlap with the previous group, using land-grant university and cooperative extension. And again, the fifth recommendation was collecting samples from various locations around the rural areas and utilizing, again, land-grant universities, extension agents, rural mail carriers, delivery drivers, who are working, operating in rural areas to achieve this goal of data collection. And the last subgroup was mapping the level of coverage, what should be mapped, speed, strength, resolution, and that kind of stuff. So they kind of came up with, there are two main types of use cases for broadband services in precision agriculture. One is real-time data transfer and data manipulation, where our speakers today talked about, if there is a problem on the field, you need to immediately, whether it's a pest or managing an irrigation system, you need a real-time control and management and transfer of that data. The second case is about transfer of data. Maybe you're monitoring soil moisture or collecting drone images. That doesn't require real-time data transfer, but it can, the tractor can come to the shop or home in the evening, and then it can be downloaded or uploaded or however. So it's a bulk transfer of data. Same way, if there is a sensor network on the field, some of them need to be transferred and managed on a real-time basis, but there are other types of data that could be accumulated over the day or over the week and transferred as a bulk data. So real-time data is essentially telematics data, and those are important for farm, that is carrying information that is important for farmers to know for managing your field well and minimizing economic impact. But they don't require huge amount of data transfer, and perhaps mobile services could be the means to transfer that data. Bulk transfer of data is, it's not just photo images or video, but primarily photo images and videos, which is not needed in perhaps real time and can be downloaded after the tractor is parked for the night. And this type of data can be a cache for a week worth of data, requires reliable fixed services of at least, we are going with what is FCC recommending now as a 25.3. And so where, so we are saying that kind of coverage is necessary for that bulk data transfer. So that's where we are. And I want to call out, I don't think Lynn is here, but Michael is here. Michael, you want to add anything to the presentation?
Shikal, just let me say two things. One, it's pretty obvious that the subgroups haven't had a chance to all work on, overlaps. We know that, right? We just really wanted to get the discussion out there. I think the other thing is, in Srikala and the working group have talked about, we'd like to pull together a panel of FCC and USDA and other folks and lay out what we're thinking about for mapping and say, what are the stumbling blocks? What are the roadblocks? What are the things that will hinder an implementation of this type of effort? And so that's scheduled, or we hope to schedule here in the near future to be beginning to hone this stuff down. But I think Shukal has done a great job of collecting all the ideas and presenting them.
Great. Thank you for that update. Questions or comments from other members of the task force? Again, you can just raise the hand in Teams and call upon that. And then Dr. Bajwa, any other, I know Dr. Adeline just mentioned, sort of there may be some overlap and, there's still more things to iron out. As part of the discussions you've had, is there anything else you'd want to communicate to the other groups, or something that needs to be right away, or is that something that's just going to happen over the next couple of weeks?
I and Jennifer had one, if you go back to the charges for the working group, it asks our working group to work with Jennifer's working group on deployment. We haven't made that much progress in that regard. I had one small chat with Jennifer. That's something we need to, as we evolve and we know a little bit more about, finalize where we are going. I think that is something we need to work on. And one of the other things we were all thinking about is this 5G kind of connectivity on farmlands and what it would need. And we have some speakers potentially lined up to talk about it. And we also want to hear from FCC on BDC, an update on BDC and the location fabric that hasn't materialized yet. But that's pretty much it. So we have more speakers scheduled, and we are going to, as Michael said, we haven't had a chance for the subgroups, the whole group, to come together and gel these recommendations, or go in depth into this recommendation and gel it together. So that's something we will be working for the next half.
Thank you. Joy has a hand up.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to make the observation of the significance of the negative map is so much more pronounced after the presentation we heard this morning. That is crop shift, that'll become even more important.
Thank you, Julie. No question there.
Okay. Any other questions or comments for the subgroup from task force members?
Can I say one more thing, Teddy?
Absolutely.
You know, this is directed at Elizabeth. I shared the presentation, but I made some small changes. I was trying to get rid of acronyms or provide expansion of those acronyms. So if she wants the current version, I would be happy to share with her.
Great, thank you, Shikala.
Okay. Thank you very much for that update. Moving on to the next working group update, will be the accelerating broadband deployment on unserved agricultural lands. Jennifer, I believe you're on, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you, Teddy. And you know, I just want to start by saying I know my vice chair isn't in today, Haran, but he's been terrific in helping me. And then also the whole working group, sub-working group has just been fantastic. Is there a way to put up my slides, or do you need me to do that?
Jennifer, I can do it. Just give me a
Okay,
second
thank you.
to
Whatever
get
you
started.
prefer. No worries. Thank you. Next slide, of course. So our working group is really tasked under the statute with developing policy recommendations and recommending new rules and amendments in terms of increasing broadband, the deployment of broadband internet access on unserved agricultural lands. And I think probably the biggest focus we've been having is this goal of achieving reliable capabilities on 95% of agricultural land in the US by 2025. That really is an extraordinary goal, and one that I think we spend a lot of time struggling on how do we get there. So that's been a big focus of our discussions. Next slide, please. To that end, these are our more specific responsibilities in trying to reach that 95% goal. Our job is to, make recommendations on how to promote the acceleration of broadband internet access. And I think we are pleased to see, a significant amount of funding that we're looking at being made available to expand broadband. But how do you make that available for the unserved agricultural lands is a little different. The removal of regulatory barriers or reduction of regulatory barriers, the allocation of spectrum and licensing spectrum. How do you do that in a way that comes to terms? And then, as my colleague mentioned, we are talking to the Mapping, Analyzing, Connectivity group to figure out what to do, but we're still early, so we'll be having more of those discussions. Next slide, please. So in terms of our activities to date, we've had 6 meetings. We're having another meeting tomorrow. We've heard from a few guest speakers on a number of areas, everything from the role of fiber to satellite to terrestrial wireless. And also one of the things that I thought was really interesting was NextNav came in to talk to us about, extending precision as they do PNT precision. And I think that's a really important area. So next slide. This is the meat of what we've been working on. We've started our draft and we're doing it a little different. While we don't have actual sub-working groups, we've broken it into different areas where people are working on the report. And that's what's outlined. And so first, we're taking a look at the 2021 recommendations and remaining actions. And I'm really happy that we have people who served last year on the same sub-working group, because that helps us have that continuity. Did they get met? What changes? Are there any changes? Do these still need to be done? And what are next steps? Then on the policy recommendations, which is really where we're focused, is we're looking at, how do we get to that 95%? So looking at reducing regulatory barriers, looking at general policies, looking at spectrum allocation and assignment issues. And I want to call out Stacy Ferraro, who's been great at sharing with us the FCC information, for instance, in the IoT docket, partitioning, disaggregation, and leasing of spectrum. I know there's other proceedings as well. We're looking at, and other issues like increased sharing and so forth that's going on. And I know other advisory committees are looking at, and the FCC is very focused on. And then I'd say one of the most important is the funding and the impact on deployment. So we're looking at the money that's been allocated via BEAD. There's money from last year in the Treasury and others, and then we're still developing other areas. So this is really the meat of what we've been working on. We have a very solid outline. We do have some drafts underway, and I'm looking forward to our next meeting where I'm hopefully going to be able to report a little further on more detail, but we're really starting to talk through these issues. And I think our speakers, and I do want to say, I really enjoyed the presentations this morning. I think those will help inform our discussions as well. So next slide. And then I just wanted to conclude with sharing our members who really are doing the work. I'm thrilled to be able to work with such people. So with that, Teddy, I'll turn the floor back to you unless there's questions.
Great, thank you, Jennifer. If there's questions from task force members, please raise the hand and I'll call on you. But same question goes to you, Jennifer. Any other things you'd want to say to other task force members, or things where we need to coordinate or collaborate that are coming up right now? And I know there's a little bit with the previous working group, but I don't know if you have any other thoughts or things to share here.
I think at this point, really, we wanted to touch base with mapping. I think because we're still just doing, going down, we have our broad outline and we're going down to that next level in the next meeting or two. So I think after then we'll be in a better situation. I'm sure we're going to want to coordinate with everyone, as I certainly want to make sure we have a unified report. It'll make it easier and make sure that, that everything works together. So I would say I expect to, I just don't know who yet.
Awesome. Thank you for that update. Any other questions? Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I'm not seeing any other.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to the third working group. That will be the examining current and future connectivity demands, needs for precision agriculture. So Heather, I will turn it over to you.
Great. Can anyone not see the presentation that looks really dark with a bright blue spot on it?
Connected, we see it.
Yes, connectivity demand working group. Great, thank you. So we'll move right in, and as Jennifer mentioned, I'd like to share the same in terms of our current working group. They're wonderful, a lot of technology-oriented people, as it should be, and they've been extremely patient with me as I've had a lot of unanticipated things happening this spring, but we're making it through and doing pretty well. So thank you to that group. And thank you especially to the round one working group. They set up such a incredible, thorough framework and documentation that I think, quite frankly, in our first few meetings, we're kind of thinking, so what can we do to build on this? But we've done a few things. Naturally, we reviewed our charge and tried to keep that front and center, especially the first 2 months as we got together to keep us in our lane, because I don't know if the other working groups find this, but it seems like sometimes it's too easy to say, you know what we should do related to mapping or deployment or adoption even. But we've kept that charge in front of us. And so our status report today covers our review and tracking, presenters and key concepts. And we've tried to share information that we've gathered along the way with some other working groups. For example, if there was a speaker that we had and we thought, you really may want to talk to this person because of these opportunities, or pull out a key concept, we've tried to do that as we go. And a side note, all these pictures come from our farm in Central Illinois, and it seems like my third son seems to be the star of the show on this one. So we're going to keep moving forward. Aspects of what we've done, naturally, disclosures and background, deciding who was going to host the Microsoft Teams. It took us a little while to really hear the FCC on the Paperwork Reduction Act. I imagine one of our recommendations, if we could put it in writing, would be to either repeal or amend the act to allow for surveying in a more efficient manner by working groups dedicated to precision agriculture. Set up the Trello board to house all our documents. And one piece of work that has been tremendous, and I really want to thank John and Robert at FCC and Stacy Lauren, Elizabeth, everybody who's contributed into that tracker, as well as Stephen Piccirillo with USDA. We've been able to take our recommendations that were made in the round one, and then they've kind of documented various activities that have happened among the federal agencies that relate to those recommendations. So it's very, very nice to have that in one document, and just don't want to overlook that. It takes time and effort. We really appreciate it. In terms of our timeline and horizon, we're looking at now, 5 years from now, and 10 years from now. And I referenced that round one report. Here's just a glimpse at that table of contents that, like I said, it was just so well done. Really a wonderful foundation. Pulled out this particular graphic. I may have one other graphic from that included, just because we've had a lot of discussion and conversations about use cases, and some of our group work has also tried to look at additional taxonomy, as one of our members has referred to it, but these basically use cases and how can we see a variety of needs and things coming, what's in play now and what do we see on the future. But one piece we did very early on is ask each member to pose the key questions that we think we need to answer as a working group. So round one work aside, where do you see our efforts being directed? What are the key questions we need to answer in order to deliver better connectivity and meet future demands within precision agriculture? And my thinking is that these presentations will be made available to all working group members, or excuse me, task force members after the fact. So I won't try to read these to you, but these questions are almost verbatim from each of our working group members. Those who worked with me in the accelerating broadband deployment in round one know that I like to use those roll calls sometimes to make sure we hear from everybody. So it's not just 3 to 5 people who are the most willing to speak out. We actually try to pull that information from everybody. So these questions have been kind of guiding my thinking as we've then moved forward in booking speakers and doing the rest of our work. I wanted to share a few slides, which we have permission to share, from some of our speakers so far. We heard from Era Labs at Ames, Iowa, and probably some other groups may have visited with them as well, but I tried to pull those slides that were really, I think, most descriptive and visually high impact in terms of describing the connectivity needed when we talk about bandwidth, data amount. Now, we don't have the latency and jitter and those other pieces in this, but it was really informative to learn not only what they're doing as a university and as it pertains to precision agriculture, but to also look at their awareness and the entire project's inclusion of rural community operations as well and functions. What we look at, like first responders, you can see on the upper right of this slide, just as an example. We've also heard from Andrew Nelson with Nelson Farms in Washington State, and that was just phenomenal. I shared with Ranveer. Ranveer helped line that up, and just really, really insightful, and have complete respect for what Andrew's building out on his farm. And this is something that, quite frankly, you know, on our farm, we're trying to do these things, but the fact, I think he's got that leg up by having studied software engineering, computer engineering, and I just loved it from a farm perspective, thinking about how I'm trying to encourage that third son to look at the software and precision ag design, possibly, since he's the one who's already built a computer and done programming in 2 codes. But I don't know if he's going to do it. But the fact that Andrew is a farmer, employs 2 interns, or at least 1, but 2, to help with stitching data together and doing analysis, and then writing his own prescriptions, that really was, for me, a pivot point in terms of how we view this. And I think that George or someone in our working group coined the phrase, or maybe it was Robert C., another presenter, who said we need to move from precision to prescription. And I know it sounds so basic, but yet that really is kind of, I think, as a working group, where we're going to be focused here is in order to get to the point where you can use the data at the farm level, not just push it up to somebody else in the chain. That's where we want to be to make better decisions and in real time management actions. So I just threw in some more examples just from Andrew's presentation of how he was deploying precision technology in his farm. The wonderful thing about what he's doing, and also again with his knowledge and background, is understanding it, that deeper dive into what kind of connectivity makes things happen. I think that last slide kind of alluded to just on his farm what his network looks like to support these types of activities. And again, to think that this is realistic for all farmers to achieve is is not realistic. So we've got to figure out how to make a better package deal, you might say. And I think collectively with the work of the entire task force, that's where we're headed. Another speaker, Joy, helped line up Robert C. with USDA Ag Research Service. And Robert brought value to us in several ways, but the two that really stood out to me were how he described the work at the community college level in research and acquiring data. And we tried to share some of that with the mapping group, the data mapping group as well, thinking, well, this may be an idea as we look at federal funding and efforts to build or weave tighter fabric around what our connectivity looks like. That to me was a very practical move forward. But the other piece that Robert really shared was kind of this holistic global view and the policy directive that we all have to make things better, and some of these supporting statistics that also drive home the significance of the industry and the factors of what we're talking about and where we're headed. So I wanted to share these slides just because to me they were pretty high impact and they tell a big story. I mentioned taxonomy, and we're looking at those use cases from round one. Also, we're trying to add in examples from peers in the industry and who we work with, what we're doing day to day, as well as our presenters. And our focus is definitely on the last acre, so that in the field. We're also looking at current needs. So this was one of those, I think George, it was an epiphany moment, because a lot of us want to be focused on that 5 and 10 years because it's fun and it's kind of, I guess, sexy, you know, like, ooh, let's really get out there and think about what could be. Absolutely cool to do that. But the reality was, I think I brought him back down to a grounding comment in June as on our farm. This is one of our fields in our really light dirt that has interesting things like sodium deposits and just a lot of interesting things going on. But it also yielded last year, we had more than 160 acres that yielded like 100 or 110 field average dry farming wheat. So for winter wheat, it's pretty good. Turned out well. But we're here in this field and we're trying to set up a research trial to do comparisons of cover crops and non-cover cropped acres over a 5-year time period. And the gentleman here with the tablet is all he's trying to do is look up the soil map so he can go pull some soil samples, do some soil cores for a baseline. He could not even get that to load in the field. And my guess is because there are 3 of us there on quotation marks 5G, followed by laughter, yes, network. We're looking at our bars. We've set up 2 different hotspots on the 2 different phones, but I guess we just maxed out our population density for that particular network coverage in that moment. So current needs, this stuff matters. Another picture here, you're looking at to the right is we have a solar installment at one of our grain bin sites, and they have not been able to connect in 5 years. We've not been able to yet see on our cell phones how that's working and how it's performing. First, it was a parts issue, and then it was we just can't make it happen issue for whatever reason, even though we have fiber optic to that premise. It's just frustrating. So I'm going to touch on this as we talk about how we're moving forward. We've had some sub work done by a few working group members investigating within the supply chain itself, both inputs into agriculture and then outputs going down, up to the food side, of asking similar questions about data on usage and connectivity. Where do they see gaps as far as ag retailers? And that's why the ag gateway conversation we think could be pretty good, we hope, in August. And also inquiring in general about the status of standards, both national and international. So we do have some upcoming speakers. We've booked Vikram Adve and Deepak Vasisht. Deepak works more in computer engineering at University of Illinois, and both of these guys are involved with AI farms. So we're going to be learning more about AI farms, artificial intelligence for future agricultural resilience, management, and sustainability, and trying to dive into some of the work they're doing across multiple research areas. That'll be next Thursday, I believe. And then we've got a request into Ag Gateway for later in August. What we're trying to do is allow time for our working group to meet as a full group kind of every other week, and then build in some speakers. But now we also have some subgroups that are underway. And within the subgroups, we are pursuing these additional topics related to current infrastructure, the fact that it's inadequate to meet current needs. And so how do you springboard into the future whenever we're kind of limping right now, or trying to cobble together what we can based on what we're trying to get done in the current framework. Our ability of producers to upgrade technologies. I mean, these are some of the driving questions that we're thinking in terms of their capacity, economic capacity. And this kind of relates to adoption and jobs, but also the interoperability and connectivity and where they're at in the world. Cybersecurity, love the presentations today, both of them. Perfect timing. Thank you, Elizabeth and team, for lining that. Teddy, everybody, Michael, lining that up. We talked a little bit about novel business models, and that had come up in the accelerating deployment piece in round one. But it's just incredible now that we're seeing more examples of it happening in the field. It seems largely driven, the examples we've seen more recently are more by ag retailers and or providers, like equipment providers, for example, but exploring that in a little more depth. And then how do we focus policy and funding discussion on telecom infrastructure toward food production and security? That's more of just a general strategic question. I said, and coming soon, teams for report preparation. This is a view from the east side of our house on a foggy morning. But we do have now 3 teams that have organized. I had a little bit of time where I was able to get a little more clarity. And so we're working on the current needs, as I mentioned, and Joyce Sterling's going to be leading that discussion. Looking at the data and demand piece. And I think Ryan Croak, who's also on the full task force, but he's helping lead that discussion. And then Ron Veer is leading the discussion or working subgroup related to projecting into the future and where do we see that taking us. So I hope this was, I hope it was efficient, but yet also useful, and look forward to working with our other working groups on how we can continue to move forward, and definitely open for advice, suggestions, and data. And now Teddy will be like, your mic was off the whole time.
Oh my God. Thank you for that update. That was great and very thorough. Any questions, comments? Dr. Adeline has a hand up.
Thanks, Teddy. So my question, you asked about on the Paper Reduction Act, but I'm wondering is it a single point in time that you want to collect information, or would it be ongoing to improve as we go forward? And if it's the latter, how can we make recommendations that would, help that move along? Because certainly in the mapping group, we're talking about NAS being able, instead of surveying at the state level to get down to the county level, and it'd be important to be much more granular in their data collection. But our recommendations will be around their improving their collection of data. So Heather, I'm asking, what are you thinking, and where do you think you're heading?
Well, as always, thank you, Michael. Even the way you phrased the question helps open a door for us, because we thought we'd looked at it from several angles and felt like we were hitting our head against the brick wall. And I think FCC was like, okay, here's the way this works. Short answer to your question, ideally, we would want this over time. It would need to be an ongoing effort. Initially, if you read the charge and it says she'll provide annually to the FCC or to the commission or the task force, whomever, a report on what anticipated current and anticipated needs are. So, with that in mind, we're thinking, okay, let's go talk to the people who are out in this space every day and gather some data. But the reality is, I mean, there are these governance structures, and there's a reason they exist. And everybody's already surmised I probably have more speeding tickets than anybody else on the call. But this question of ongoing, maybe that gives us a door and a way to approach this. And definitely from a recommendation standpoint, it seems like it's fair game. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments for Heather and the team?
Julie, are you going to say, I thought she was getting ready to, trying to read the body language.
Well, but before I let you go, Heather, I mean, any other questions or comments you have for any of the other working groups, and as we go forward, any needs for collaboration or getting together or anything like that?
Well, for our part, we'll continue to share things as we come up with it, but I'm absolutely serious. Open door for any suggestions, or as you happen upon information related to connectivity and needs, as you see it, we welcome that, and want to incorporate that into our thinking and make sure that we are as relevant as possible in our outcome.
Thank you, Heather.
All
Okay.
right.
Next working group update will be the encouraging adoption of precision agriculture and availability of high quality jobs on connected farms. So with that, Julie, I'll turn it over to you for an update.
Great. Thank you, Teddy. Elizabeth, can you share slides, please? Perfect. Thank you. Before moving on, I will share our charge with the task force, which is to promote effective policy and regulatory solutions that encourage the adoption of broadband access service on farms and ranches, and to promote precision agriculture. Okay, next slide. So our group spent the first several meetings really honing in on identifying what we'd call our key areas of focus. We went through the 2021 recommendations from term 1 and highlighted where we wanted to add additional detail or include a new area of focus. And what we've come up with is we want to focus on affordability, both the tech side of adoption and also connectivity. We wanted to focus on cybersecurity and data privacy from an adoption standpoint, but also the job creation and education side. Autonomy and workforce, which is directly correlated with one of our charges, and really explore efficiency and sustainability and finding the synergies with low carbon initiatives and the efficiencies that drive ROI on the farm. Digital literacy, education and outreach, which we had broad recommendations in term 1 around land grant universities, community colleges, CTE programs, and what does that look like moving forward? And then finally, how do we measure success, that we are establishing all our key areas of focus and have created and promoted effective policy to do so. The means to measure success is very important for our work group. We did feel term 1 recommendations didn't wholly encompass one of our charges, which is the metrics Commission could apply to measure and track progress towards broadband deployment and precision ag adoption. We feel we'll focus on that wholeheartedly this go around. Once we established our areas of focus, We actually internally developed a tracker tool. Our Vice Chair, Jared Taubman, went through the recommendations and essentially pulled them apart and identified where we should focus on. We also are using the tracker that was put together internally. And it was really actually eye-opening for us. There had been some policy initiatives that directly reflected our 2021 recommendations. So that was great to see. And then we typically focus each meeting on one key area of focus with a speaker, and then work group discussion around what we heard, any additional discussion around that, et cetera. And then we've got a draft here of what our deadlines are, and I'd like to share that with the group to make sure it is what we want to see as far as the task force goes. So we would like to have a draft report completed internally October 1st, official draft done November 1st, and then our final report presented to the task force for review. Our completion date there is December 2nd. Okay, next slide, please. So we really have spent our time focusing on two key initiatives: cybersecurity, data privacy, and affordability. For cybersecurity and data privacy, we heard from Michael Bahar. He's the global lead cybersecurity at Eversheds Sutherland. Formerly, he was legal counsel for the U.S. House Intelligence Committee and drafted the Cybersecurity Act of 2015, the U.S. Freedom Act, and then 4 annual intelligence authorization acts thereafter. This was a great and lively conversation with the group. I think we'll have several recommendations that stem from it, all the way from standards, dual factor, and over into the education piece, which we heard about this morning. Okay, next slide. Around affordability, the connectivity portion of this, Jeff Johnston from CoBank joined us, and he spoke on private networks in their recent report. We also touched pretty heavily on different business models, whether that's farmer-owned or private industry owned and operated. And that actually led us to a conversation around spectrum allocation. So I do see some synergies there with other work groups, and we will be scheduling a conversation on spectrum allocation on farm, and also as a synergy for our metrics for the commission to use as part of our charge. Next slide. And then affordability topic around technology. We heard from Craig Burning, legislative aide for U.S. Senator Deb Fischer. He gave us an update on the Precision Ag Loan Act. This was very synergistic with our recommendations from 2021. So it was great to hear about the update there, and also spoke to us on growing climate solutions and gave us an update. So we will and really think we'll expand our recommendations in this area in particular, and as well as those key areas of focus. I think that is the end of the slides.
Thank you, Julie. Any questions, comments from the task force members for Julie and the rest of the team? Then any comments or from your end, Julie, as far as working with the other groups or things that have come up when you've had the discussions with your teams?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we are wholly focused on fleshing out kind of our key initiatives, key areas, and then hopeful we'll be able to socialize that with the other working groups and as they come out, specifically spectrum allocation, cybersecurity, and what that means for accelerating deployment. So once that's done, I think our next phase prior to our first draft will be very much socializing amongst the work groups.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that was all the updates on the working groups. Again, you know, the common question I asked everyone was there any sort of comments or areas of collaboration? Again, as you start to narrow down the recommendations for the fall, please feel free to reach out to the various groups. I know that's learning from the previous task force where, we did have that discussion, but we didn't really get into the sharing and co-combining things. So the sooner we can do that, the better. And then the more unified our recommendations will come together for this fall, but particularly for the next year as we bring it all together. So good progress from everyone. It looks like everybody's starting to at least have a good handle on what those recommendations might be. Obviously, more work required, more meetings to be had. Those are all good things, and so exciting to see that the progress we're making here. Okay, so this is the portion of the agenda where we switch over to any open discussion. So is there any other discussion about any other topics, again, for the task force members to bring up at this point? Again, use the hands up in the Microsoft Teams to do so. And first will be Dr. Adeline.
So Teddy, I've been thinking about this, and I want to pose a question to the group. If we're talking about food security, if we're talking about the, epic shift in how we do agriculture, would it be appropriate for us to talk about connectivity at some basic level free, like the highway system? And that could be under some particular threshold, but to one, stimulate the use of broadband in precision agriculture, and also not to leave anybody out, at least at some basic threshold. And so I wondered if what the task force thought about, moving forward with some recommendation in that particular area.
So a lot to contemplate there. And obviously it could actually belong to multiple working groups, right? It's not necessarily just one, which I think is why you're raising it here. And something for the working group chairs to take back and discuss with the teams. But any initial reactions to that comment or to that thought there from the work group task force members? Dr. Bajwa?
One of the related questions that have come up in my conversation is, are we going to regulate the price? And I would give an example. I have a farm, or we have a university farm in the outskirts of Bozeman. Bozeman is, the second or third largest city in Montana, and connectivity there, the farm doesn't have any connectivity, and we have been getting quotes, and there is a initial installment cost, but beyond that, the monthly expenditure or monthly charge I was given was $2,000. This is a 600-acre farm, not some 100,000 acres or something. But so I hear from, when I talk to people, is at some point this is going to be something like a rural electric cooperative, or is there going to be some sort of a price restriction coming from the government so people can afford it? I don't have a great silver bullet answers for Michael's question. I like the idea though.
Yeah. Well, and there's also as we saw in the presentation, the last meeting we had, right? And there's an affordability component to it in there. It kind of follow the same lines, but I think this is the idea of attached to food security and those that are in food production. Is there something to be thought of there? So I think it's an interesting idea. Jennifer?
Hey, Teddy. So I'm a real big believer, as a service provider in the ACP, the Affordable Connectivity Program. And just for folks who aren't aware of it, it actually started at a higher rate, but today the government's allowed $30 for people below certain criteria, generally below the poverty line, to encourage broadband adoption. But I think that program will help with deployment and, of course, with use, because the more people you have who are able to afford. And I would think maybe something, just if such a program could be crafted for farms, once again, doesn't have to be based on poverty, based on other criteria, I think that is, I can tell you as a satellite operator, we've seen that been a really big success with customers getting online. So, I'm thinking that's another way just to, as opposed to setting tariffs, which I'm not a firm believer, I don't think the government, as a former FCC employee, I can say this, I don't think, and back when we used to set rates, I don't think the government's the best predictor of that. Competition is, but if you could help people afford service, that would help. And I think that's going to be really those sorts of programs, and not just that program would be good. So just a thought there.
Yeah, that's a good thought. And our next meeting will be later in the year. I don't think we have enough time, but I do think if you're in the working groups, what you could do is reach out and have somebody come talk about that affordable connectivity program, not necessarily as that being the way to do it, but that could give, to Jennifer's point, a model to think about this issue. Other questions, comments on the previous topic, on just the topic we were just having now? See something in the chat there. It says subsidies is a way different than the concept of regulating providers down to free. Curious on how those who have now made significant capital investments expect to get recovery or cover operating costs, right? You see, there's lots of things to consider in this. Andy?
I don't know whether my camera's working, Teddy, so you may just get audio. Is that all right?
That's okay.
Okay. So I'm going to just follow up on Heather's presentation a little bit, in that she mentioned that there was a handful of us that are thinking about supply chain issues. And I wasn't going to raise my hand at all. And actually, you can't see my hand apparently today. But it did couple a little bit with Dr. Adeline's comment about food security. And I think it couples with what the notion of agriculture is by definition. Because what I'm seeing, and I had this conversation today, and I'm having it a lot now, is that the supply chain problems that we seem to be having in agriculture are causing a level of waste and disruption and inefficiency that perhaps we've not seen before. And so in the mapping and connectivity group, and I think in a couple of the other places I saw this afternoon when I was finally able to get on this call, we are rightly focused a great deal on the farm itself and the connectivity on the farm. And we have so many unbelievably exciting advances on the way on the farm. But I think from a food security perspective and from a consumer perspective of knowledge of what's in the food that they consume, I think that we do need to think of the connectivity all the way from the farm to the supermarket or to the food bank. And I've seen some articles recently that have really hit home with me about particularly companies in fresh vegetable production having supply chain dilemmas caused by lack of connectivity to their fleet of tractor trailers going from farm field to processing facilities. And so I just throw out that, it's something that, I'm thinking about a lot. I know it doesn't fit precisely within it's on a farm, that's what we're working on, but I think it warrants a lot of thought, and it couples pretty well with where I think we're going with a knowledge base that will tell a consumer how something was raised, whether it was raised in a sustainable environment, and whether it's going to be something that the customer will want to purchase.
Well, that's a great comment, Andy. And then the other piece, just to add to that, is, even if with the advances on the farm, and let's say we do get precision agriculture and get to that subfield level and be able to control how much we produce, how we produce it, and everything else. If it's that goes downstream in the supply chain, whether it's food, fuel, fiber, or feed, if it gets lost there, right, all the productivity you've gained and all the precision you gained up front, it gets lost as you go further down in that value chain. So yeah, you got to think of it end to end. another interesting topic for, again, for the working group chairs to be thinking about as it applies to your area and the discussions to be had further, I think, in those working groups. Julie, I see your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Teddy. Andy, I do want to add, and I'll speak for our working group here. In term one, some of our recommendations do surround traceability and sustainability, really getting to what you just mentioned. I completely agree with you, and I will take back some of these comments to our working group to see if we want to further focus on exploring that. I think it's super important. So thanks for the comment.
Thank you, Julie. Any other questions, comments? 7 seconds to make sure we give everybody a chance. So I'm not seeing any other hands go up. So kind of going into the closing thoughts here. Great discussion today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, both from the DHS on cybersecurity, as well as from the Association of Equipment Manufacturers on the future of food, but also expanding that a little bit more to just future of agriculture and even how it relates to some of the close industries there. I thought that was great engagement from the team. I love when there's a lot of questions coming forward. I know when we were putting that 1 hour together, it was almost like we were shrinking the amount of presentation time and leaving more room for Q&A. And at the end, it looked like there was going to be 40 minutes of Q&A, and maybe there was too much room, and we had to actually end up going over by 4 minutes. So it means, like, you know, when we have topics like this, they do hit the mark. As you think about future meetings, obviously you're having a lot of presentations in the working groups, and it looks like you're making some very good progress with some of the thinking and the recommendations that will go forward. But even in that, if you do see a presentation or you have a speaker or a set of speakers or a topic that you think, you know what, this might be better or this may be good for the full task force, obviously please reach out to myself or Elizabeth, and then we will see as we have our meetings in the fall if we could have a couple of presentations scheduled that way. So just please keep that in mind, and even the discussion we just had now and a few of the thoughts here on that could be something where we could bring in a speaker and have that discussion here as well, which I think would be very good and informative to the task force members to take back down to the working groups. But as usual, and as you know, and most of you are all of you are part of the working groups and have been even in the previous term, a lot of the work and the discussions and the meat of the recommendations does happen in the working groups. And obviously the role of the task force here is to make sure that, like, as the recommendations come through, we're stacking hands and making sure that we're in alignment with the recommendations we're putting forth to the FCC and to the USDA. So with that, Elizabeth, maybe I'll turn it over to you. You can tell us a little bit about the future meetings, what we can expect from a timeline perspective, and then we'll adjourn.
Great, thanks, Teddy. And I just want to echo what you just said about the presentations today and the discussions that fostered after. I thought it was really engaging and opening, and there's a lot of great ideas that are percolating, and a lot are already in progress, as we've seen from the working groups. And so my thanks to everyone on the working groups for their efforts thus far. I think we're in great shape as we look ahead. As much as we would all like to just talk and think about these ideas, there is a statutory requirement that there be a report produced both this year and next year at the end of the 2-year term. So looking ahead for this year, we do have 2 more task force meetings that will be of the full task force. We've scheduled the first coming up for October 5th. That will be more of a check-in. So it will only be a couple of hours in the afternoon, primarily consisting of updates, and again, having this opportunity for task force members to hear what the working groups are working on, and give any feedback or guidance, especially in the sort of cross collaboration areas of overlap between the groups. So that's a tentative agenda. It's subject to change, but October 5th is the day we've set aside for that. Then the final task force meeting of the year will be December 2nd. And as the last of the year, that will be the date on which the task force will vote to adopt the recommendations that all of the working groups will put forth in their reports. So with regard to the report deadlines, to make sure that they are ready for voting at that last meeting in December, the FCC will need 30 days to review the reports and to circulate them to the task force members for their review. So that puts it at November 2nd for those reports to be due to FCC and to the task force leadership. We'll make sure that you all get the copies to take that time to review and think about it and come prepared to the meeting in December, ready to further discuss, refine, and then ultimately vote to adopt. So with that in mind, I know we've had some meetings with the working group leadership to sort of set a internal suggested path forward for considering drafts, outlines. It sounds like a lot of you are already in progress to that end, but just being aware of the deadlines at play for having the reports done and submitted by November 2nd. And again, that October meeting is a good opportunity. If there's anything that the group would like to discuss, again, we'll all be back to have those presentations, those updates, and then can move forward from that. So I think that covers it for me. Again, I'd also like to give a great thanks, shout out to our FCC and USDA liaisons from inside on our end, who have been right alongside the working groups to all the work they've done. Our team has been just there answering any questions, and I'm really grateful for their help as well. So with that, Teddy, I will turn it back over to you to adjourn us.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth. And then obviously we've done all these meetings virtual. You know, as things are opening up, maybe we don't know now, but I think we'll see if, like, not necessarily probably the meeting in October, but we'll consider if the December one might be a face-to-face, but still a long ways away. We don't know anything, so but we'll communicate early enough to where folks could make arrangements if that's the case, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I agree that the October meeting, by its nature, just being also a bit shorter as well, we'll definitely keep that virtual, but we are looking to have discussions about going forward, both for the December meeting and then also next year as well.
Yeah. So that'll be exciting to be able to, and I know it's great to do broadband meetings or connectivity meetings using the broadband capabilities, but you know, obviously the face-to-face would be great. So with that, again, I would echo what Elizabeth said as far as thanking the liaisons, both from the FCC and the USDA, for all the support and help up to this point. Elizabeth, thank you for the guidance and making sure that, you know, we kind of run along smoothly. And then also thank you to all the task force members, and particularly to the working group members as well, because I know that's where the bulk of the work is done. That's where the discussions happen. So please, chairs, if you take that back to the working groups, that'd be great. And with that, we will adjourn the meeting for today. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.